kit contents check. In them you'll find 145 caliber automatic, 2 boxes of ammunition, 4 days concentrated emergency rations, 1 drug issue containing antibiotics, morphine, vitamin pills, pep pills, sleeping pills, tranquilizer pills, 1 miniature combination Russian phrase book and Bible, $100 in rubles, $100 in gold, 9 packs of chewing gum, 1 issue of prophylactics, 3 lipsticks, 3 pairs of nylon stockings. Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good podcast with all that stuff.
Boy, oh boy. I didn't know what you were going to do. I didn't know if you were going to do Strangelove or
I felt like some of them are so overquoted that I almost felt like I couldn't do them. Well,
that was good. I like that.
Doing Fighting in the War Room feels like we're stepping on our buddies at Fighting in the War Room, the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, I was like, what? Sir, I have a plan. Mein Führer, I can podcast. Like, that's not, I don't want to fucking say Mein Führer at the top. I want to wait 30 seconds before saying Mein Führer.
I wanted you to say Mein Führer, I can podcast. Is Mein Führer, I can walk? Is that actually the last line? Like, does anyone say anything else after that? No, right?
No, then it's just
it. Apart from the song, right? It's a pretty good last line.
I'll also say this, like I for whatever reason, battling insomnia, was watching Robin Hood last night, Disney Robin Hood.
Okay.
And the second I started doing that butchering, I was like, oh fuck, even though I watched Strangelove this morning, I'm having a hard time staying in the moderately more grounded Slim Pickens than Sheriff of Nottingham Slim Pickens, who's like, oh, listen here, I'm gonna get Robin Hood. It's the last thing I do.
The only thing Strangelove is missing is Roger Miller songs. I feel like that really would have taken it over the top. A little whistle stop, that would have been beautiful.
Could you imagine if the Crazy Frog did like a remix of a Strangelove song?
Wait, I'm sorry. What is that a reference to?
You remember Crazy Frog?
I remember Crazy Frog, sure. Yes,
and Crazy Frog had like beep-a-dee-a-beep-a-dow-bow, right?
Oh, that's right. Okay.
It's a sped-up version of one of the Roger Miller Odalali songs in Robin Hood.
Do you guys want to start over?
Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Oh, no. We're going to keep it going. That's right.
It's perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect. Wow. How else to talk about this movie?
We're aiming to do the Doctor Strangelove podcast episode, something that is both so intelligent and savage in its razor sharp wit, but yet funny, just fucking gut busting. Like, it's so serious, but so funny at the same time.
I think we're nailing it.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I want to put forward a thesis very early on in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Is this one of those movies that just like absolutely ruined a lot of filmmakers?
Okay, what do you mean?
I do think a lot of people go off the deep end trying to make this movie in particular, a thing that like very few people have ever even gotten close to doing.
What's a movie you're thinking of? Like what's an example of a satire gone wrong, I guess, or whatever you're thinking of?
Last 10 Years of Adam McKay.
That's a good. I would say that's a good example. There you go. Yes, because you can always say like, "Oh, I'm doing the light dark thing," like Strangelove. Like,
right?
It's gonna have a message. It's gonna be intelligent. It's gonna be researched, but also it's gonna be funny. And that last part's really hard.
It's gonna be silly. Like, we'll have some broad comedy in it. We'll have comedic performances. It's not just like bone dry satire. That mix of tones. I mean, I'm going to come up with some other ones as we continue talking, but I feel like the other ones are more maybe errant films in people's careers, but they tend to be some of their biggest bounces.
Like 1941.
Sure. Yes.
Yes. Right?
Yeah.
That's trying to mix light and dark. I don't know. What do you think? Guess. Speak.
I mean, it depends, right? Because it's all contextual, right? It's like in the 60s, it's a little bit easier to push this and be abrasive and impressive because there's no social media, there's no commentary universe, there's no podcasting. So the first person who created the first black comedy about nuclear warfare was always going to be the victor, right? And it just so happened to be maybe the smartest person who ever made a movie. And so when you put those two things together,
he got out there in front, right?
Yeah, he shit all over the landscape, for lack of a better phrase. But I think you're right though that McKay this is probably his North Star, right? As a movie, this is like the number one thing that has been made that he is striving towards, and just changing the subject ever so slightly and trying to do absurdist, ridiculous, deathly serious all at the same time. And it's hard to do. This movie is a one of one. There's not a single thing in the movie universe, I think, that you can accurately compare it to.
Well, and not to like gang up on McKay, but it is one of those things where you're like, oh, he pretty much made like 4 or 5 masterpieces in a row to start off his career. But it was because he found his own recipe for like cranking up the goofiness, the silliness, the absurdity, and then putting a surprising amount of seriousness underneath it. And then the more he's been like, I want to get the exact Kubrick ratio and tonally present itself on that level, the more you're like, these have become less funny and the points you're making start to feel less nuanced and more you're yelling at me. Like the thing that doesn't work is when people try to make exactly this movie. Like Iannucci has done a great job doing things that are similar to this, but finding his own style and tone rather than directly trying to lift the Strangelove vibe that I think dooms a lot of people. Look, this is a podcast called Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David.
Very fast. It is a show about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. And sometimes those checks clear, and sometimes they bounce, baby. And this is a miniseries on the films of Stanley Kubrick. It is called Pod's Wide Cast. A lot of people were disappointed that we didn't make the miniseries title a riff on Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, just because there were so many words to play with there.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, I guess they thought that'd be funny. Oh, you think it's a missed opportunity? Shit. All right. Well, we can always go back, Griff.
Yeah, How I Learned to Stop Potting and Love the Cast. I mean, it's right there for you.
I know.
Pod's Wide Cast just felt so funny to me.
Griffin was resolute about
It was
this.
immediate.
And sometimes we fight, and sometimes I'm just sort of like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I seeded this one immediately. I did not have a hot counterpoint to this one. So it's Pod's Wide Cast.
I just think it's rare. You have like a 3-word title where you can sub in pod and cast, and it so clearly could only be one movie. And I think Eyes Wide Shut is such a good title to begin with. If I were to have taken a crack, and just to be clear, Pod's Wide Cast, it was like first pitch, best pitch. I just said, we're fucking going with this. We never even took it to the lab. We never threw it up on the whiteboard and tried to break down Dr. Strangelove. If I had tried to crack it, I think my approach would have been putting pod and cast in there 3 times each.
Can I suggest one other option here?
Yeah.
You had full podcast right in front of you as an option.
But
and it seems simple, and yet it is so elegant.
Yeah.
Full podcast.
Full podcast.
What about Pod Metal Jack Cast?
Sure, that's less elegant, but
Sean, you're getting a window into this brainstorming process where someone suggests something fairly simple, and Griff's like, and it sort of works its way through some little Rube Goldberg machine and comes back out really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I've learned not to fight.
And love the bomb. Essentially, it's like someone comes to me with a miniseries title suggestion, and then I go like, let's get that up on the fucking treadmill. Let's build a little sweat on that thing. Let's get you a little winded. You're doing a pleasant stroll up. It's like fucking Mandrake walking up and just going like, sir, I found something. I'm like, no. I'm going to put you through the paces. Doctor Podcasts or How I Learned to Stop Potting.
I'm getting off
and
of
love
this.
the
Who cares?
cast.
Lol
getting us off of it.
Podita Cast, I think. Lol
That's
Podita Cast.
it.
That's great. And the best movie to invoke. I mean, that's
Right.
the one you really want.
Or
front and center for people.
Podcastita. How did they ever make a podcast out of Lolita?
I want to say like 3 things based on other conversations we've had. Okay,
Please.
1,
Also, by the way, our guest is Sean Fennessey,
Hi.
the Ringer universe.
host of The Big Picture, fairly permanent sort of co-host of the Rewatchables, right? You're on almost all of those.
I'm on
You're
a lot
most
of those. I'm on a lot. I'm just delighted to be witnessing naming of podcast series, which is one of my favorite things that you guys do. So this is an honor.
It's good to hear that is enjoyed by people, because
Yes.
sometimes you have the thought, who on earth would want to hear this?
Well, but by me, I'm not saying by people.
Sure.
I enjoy it.
Well, by
You're a
person. It's
smart
enjoyed
guy.
by person, at the very least. You are, bar none, one of the most requested guests in the history of show.
You are the one. I said this to my wife yesterday. Sean, I apologize. My wife doesn't know who you are. I said like, the podcast tomorrow. we have like a big guest. And she was like, who? And I said, Sean Fennessey. And she's like, I don't know who that is. And I was like, well, he's our most requested guest. That's how I put it to her.
That's very sweet. I'm grateful to her for not knowing who I am or caring. I am grateful to anybody who is excited, and I'm excited. And as you guys know, I love your show, and I love Dr. Strangelove, and I love Stanley Kubrick and everything else that you're doing. So this is it's weird. It's almost like I don't have anything to say. You know that feeling when you've seen a movie and you're like, they nailed it. Like I got nothing. You know, like this is a perfect document.
Good. Good.
Good. 10 out of 10. No, but there's 2 things I want to say already. So there are things to say.
Yeah. You had a list of 3 things. Yeah.
I forgot one of them already. But when we were talking about how this defeats comedic filmmakers, does it help that Stanley Kubrick isn't funny? Because maybe Stanley Kubrick isn't funny.
And
that's why Dr. Strangelove works, right? Because the seriousness is so crystal, like is so perfect, you know, and like that's what makes every joke funnier. And then my second point, pin in that. My second point is Mandrake secretly the funniest of the 3 Sellers roles.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Like the most underplayed, yes, but actually the funniest.
Yes. Mandrake talking about being captured by the Japanese is the funniest part of this whole movie. And I don't even understand that scene in full, but his performance is amazing.
I feel like he could just, and I assume he was, just sort of do that for like hours. Just kind of keep talking in this like absolutely like chummy way about horrible things, like just endlessly with this perfect like modulated. It would be so funny to watch him just rattle stuff like that off.
It's kind of incredible. Like obviously, yeah, I'm gonna go on a limb here. I think Peter Sellers had quite a bit of range as an actor, and it is stunning that arguably his best work has come from across his career the times he like almost violently underplayed things. Like when he plays boring people better than maybe anyone in history for someone who's capable of going fucking huge. And I was talking to a different podcast luminary named Sean, our buddy Sean Clements of Hollywood Handbook and the Flagrant Ones and everything. We were texting about, I don't remember what it started we were texting about, but it got to us talking about De Niro and Jackie Brown and how incredible a performance that is. And I was saying to him, like, I like study that performance once a year, going like, what is the difference between how full this guy feels, even though De Niro is almost spitefully going out of his way to underplay it in every single moment, do as little as possible. And when you get to like De Niro and Limitless, where you're like, well, now he's actually doing nothing. And it's such a thin line where it's like, to actively play someone who's got so little going on is so deceptively difficult. Because you watch something like this, like Mandrake, and you're just like, this could have been played by any stuffed shirt, any dramatic actor Kubrick hired to fill this. You could have had Sellers play a different character in this dynamic. You easily could have had Sellers play the Sterling Hayden character. And then you just have a guy who's like a straight man, right? Who would have been fine, but wouldn't have made this character as funny. And it's like, how is he making such active choices for such a passive guy? It's kind of a magic trick.
He is he was supposed to play another character, right? They were supposed to be that 4th character. It's supposed to be Kong, and he wasn't Kong. But so that's also a testament to how he could have basically played any character. Like, is he in that realm of, is there any character in any movie that he can't play that I guess is a man? Because I don't know. I mean, he really is unusually good at tonal shift in performance across a movie. Like, how many movies did he play multiple characters? 6, 7? Like, he did it over and over and over again. There's not really, I guess Eddie Murphy is in the conversation for that. Alec Guinness. There's like only a handful of people who really have been able to do that the way that he has.
I mean, you're of course forgetting, and spoiler alert, the end credit scene of DC League of Super Pets, in which Dwayne Johnson simultaneously voices Crypto the Super Dog, Black Adam, and Black Adam's dog. And all 3 share a scene together, and it's a really thrilling.
Wait, how did they pull that off? All 3 of them sharing a scene. My God,
you can't believe the synergy on screen. I mean, this thing, the fucking IP surprises are off the chart.
I love IP surprises.
Can you tell me more about Black Adam's dog? What kind of dog is it?
Yeah,
I
what's
think,
his name?
I think he's like a Doberman. They never name him. That's why I'm calling him Black Adam's dog. They never name him on screen. He talks a lot. He has a lot of dialogue. It's an end credit scene that feels interminable, where you're almost like, am I just watching the sequel now? Is this going to be another 90 minutes of my life?
That's the one thing that Strangelove is missing, I think, is a stinger,
Yeah.
teasing Strangelove 2. That's what I
It's
miss.
almost missing, if I dare get the specific, Black Adam's dog. I feel like that's the character.
Bring him in.
That's
Yeah.
the fourth character that Sellers should have played.
I mean, I do remember watching this and being like, I knew Sellers had almost played the Pickens character, and I was like, well, who else could he have played? And then I was like, well, he could have played Jack D. Ripper, right? He could have been Sterling Hayden. I was like, why didn't he do that? And then finally I was like, oh, right, he would have been playing both characters in the same scene with no other characters. I guess that would have been hard. But that I even considered that for a while very doable. I was like, he could have done that. Is a testament to his how good he is at this. I think Eddie Murphy is really funny. I'll just let that sentence stand. I think he's really funny.
Sure, that's bold.
Yeah.
Right. And I think sometimes when he did the multiple characters, obviously it was incredibly successful.
Yeah.
But it never felt like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no Eddie Murphy multiple role performance where you're like, man, these are really distinct. Instead, it's like, oh, Eddie Murphy found like a stupid thing to do as Mama Clump or what. I don't know. Am I wrong? Is that rude? I mean, I like the Nutty Professor, the main two characters, obviously.
Sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
But beyond that, is there an Eddie Murphy character I sort of love as much as one of these three? Maybe I'm being rude to Eddie Murphy.
I think so. I mean, you're talking two Nutty Professors coming to America, Norbit. And is there another one I'm forgetting where he plays multiples?
Norbit is the one we need to set aside. I think.
Yes.
That's coming to
Bowfinger.
America.
Bowfinger.
Oh, well, Bowfinger. Fuck, obviously Bowfinger.
That
it's
is
those
the
two
one.
again, but that is the one.
But
That's
they're
the
really
one.
distinct.
So distinct.
And
Yes.
especially because
Yes.
one of them is
that's the one.
absolutely no transformation. I think what's just so unique about this is Eddie Murphy, when he would do it, would sort of like sketch instincts go for like big handles on characters, like really distinct, defined looks, voices, clear internal games. And this, it's like Sellers chooses to have 2 out of 3 characters essentially be straight men, like very, very buttoned down, quiet characters. It makes sense that they wanted him to also play another big, crazy guy.
Right.
And it also makes sense that they title this movie after the biggest, most cartoonish character he plays, because this movie's existence was pretty much predicated on Peter Sellers playing multiple characters seems to be big at the box office.
Right.
And that the takeaway from Lolita was like, Sellers maybe saved that movie commercially. We need more of that.
I think that was also true for Eddie Murphy after the Nutty Professor, which makes sense. It's slightly different though, because the idea of greenlighting a nuclear age black comedy from the difficult man who made Spartacus and Lolita being predicated upon Sellers playing 4 characters is outlandish. I mean, it is like, forget about in 2022, like in any time in the history of Hollywood, that being the like, okay, we're a go picture here.
Yeah.
Take a shot at it. It makes it feel impossible.
It's almost like if like Catherine Bigelow making Zero Dark 30 was dependent on Will Ferrell playing 3 characters in it.
Or Chris Pratt.
Right.
Or Mark Duplass.
Yeah, Duplass should have actually done that, because Duplass is the man of 1,000 faces. Anytime he shows up, I'm like, who is this?
Yeah.
What's even weirder is, Sellers had done The Mouse That Roared, and he's playing multiple parts.
Parties happened at this point, or is the party later?
The party is later. The party is surprisingly late.
Is it
1968.
Okay.
I remember when I was shown The Party, it was like one of my mom's friends. I was at like a dinner party and I was bored, and my mom's friend was like, "Oh, you can watch a movie." And she put on The Party, and she was like, "This movie's really funny. It's offensive, but it's really funny." And I was like, I'm like 10 years old. I'm like, okay. And even at 10, I was like, it does seem offensive. But no, The Party had not happened yet. No, my point was, he'd done The Mouse That Roared, and then, like you say, he only plays one character in Lolita, but I guess because that character changes his outfit and his manner enough, they were like, well, he was kind of doing it in Lolita, and that's that a Hollywood studio would look at Lolita and be like, more of Sellers is what we need to make a Kubrick film hit. It's like you say, Sean, it makes no sense.
Well, it's also I mean, at this point, our Lolita episode would have come out, but we haven't recorded it yet.
We haven't yet. No, we're doing it next week.
You have not rewatched it, have you, David?
I actually just rewatched it.
Okay. So, I mean, there is like the therapist scene where he's fully like in a disguise playing a full character. Right. Where some of the other stuff is more like, oh, he's like loosely affecting a personality.
Yeah, there's that scene like on the patio, where he has his back to James Mason and is effectively playing a different person, but doesn't have a name or anything.
No,
like that.
It's one of those things where I think he's simultaneously kind of the best part of the movie and ruinous to the movie.
Totally.
But I think everyone was sort of like, why is Kubrick making this movie? Why is Mason making this movie? This movie is going to be a career ruiner. This is disastrous. Don't touch it. And something about the Sellers thing kind of like floated everyone along, salvaged that movie from being like a career ender for everyone involved. And I think they were like, well, this was a little more profitable than we thought it would be. And it must be because people love Peter Sellers putting on different glasses.
I mean, I think that the critical thing that happens, though, is that he makes the Pink Panther. Like, if he doesn't make the Pink Panther immediately after Lolita, then I think what you're positing and the idea that this movie, like, that's why the movie got made, right? The Strangelove got made because he became Clouseau, and he had already been a widely celebrated comic actor, and he was this chameleonic figure. And, you know, the other thing, too, is, like, I love the fact that he's, like, going through a divorce while he's making this movie. You know, he's, like, having a very personal, like, a real personal struggle, which is why it's shot in England, because he can't leave. So he has to shoot at Shepperton Studios. Like, all of this stuff leads to it being a movie that probably, like, would you say it doesn't work at all if there's no Peter Sellers in it?
No, I mean, this is getting back to David's point, is, like, I think the alchemy of this movie is that, like, one guy was pretty much handling the comedy and one guy was pretty much handling the seriousness of the thing. And when we talk about other filmmakers like jumping off a cliff trying to replicate this, the problem is usually it's a funny guy getting too self-serious or a serious guy trying too hard to be silly. And that's usually where the tone gets affected versus this movie where it's kind of like two guys meeting in the middle. And I don't know if there's another comedy star of this moment that could have done that.
I'm trying to find the one thing I want to find is when they shot this. Just read the Pink Panther, because this, although I guess Shot in the Dark is
this
when?
same
When's
year.
That?
It's 64.
Shot in the Dark is 64. The Pink Panther is 63, because this movie was delayed because of the assassination of Kennedy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember when it was shot, but it looks like it was shot in 63. So I don't know. Like I think it came together in 63. So but it's just, look, I got, obviously I have our dossier. We can get into how this movie got greenlit a little bit, but it is something that should just not work. And it wouldn't work most of the time. Most of the time, if you get people together to do a nuclear war comedy, it's probably just not going to work. But I mean, I guess also every movie that's a nuclear war comedy now has just the Strangelove shadow that you can't escape. And when you joked about this movie having a tag, I remembered that Don't Look Up has a tag, right?
Yes.
And I get the tag. I get why they did the tag, because they're like, well, we have to have something funny at the end here and a little bit of poetic justice. But it also kind of undercuts the big sentimental ending of that movie, and I don't know if we want it or we need it. I don't know. Anyway,
no, I think
just thinking about the stakes.
Look, I think the ending is the best part of that movie. I either like Don't Look Up more than most people or hate it less than most people. I don't know which of those truths I'm closer to, but I'm certainly less negative on it than a lot of people. But I think the ending is the thing it gets right. And the tag is like a perfect encapsulation of everything it gets wrong. And like
it's too strong. It makes your teeth hurt.
Also the Jonah Hill performance like doesn't work. It's the exact example of this where it's like, here are two smart guys like McKay and Hill making the most surface level observations about a dumb kind of person who represents a lot of the ills of current society with nothing to say beyond, isn't this guy annoying? Isn't like social media stupid? Like everything he says is dumb.
Yeah, I feel similarly on Don't Look Up as you, Griffin, which is like there's definitely good things in it.
There's stuff in
I
there.
agree. I agree with that.
It didn't totally cohere, and it's almost like too star-studded for its own good, and it feels
Yes.
like it's after some sort of like Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno kind of a thing. But it's ironic because you could make the case, and David, you basically already said this, like the last line of Strangelove might be the funniest moment in the movie.
So funny.
Yeah.
And the final moments of Don't Look Up are like deathly sincere, like so earnest that it's almost painful, and it's effective, but it almost betrays the whole tone of the movie. And then it makes you think like maybe Adam McKay should have just made an earnest movie about, climate change and annihilation.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, because he's so earnest. Like, he's in such an earnest place, I think, as an artist. And I do think you're right. He should just be making very earnest movies because it's often the satire that isn't functioning as well in the recent stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
There's like human comedy in Don't Look Up that works well, where I'm like, I think the dynamic between Chalamet and Lawrence is kind of interesting in terms of just
good
like
in that movie.
Yeah, and just like how do you recalibrate your entire brain if you know that you're going to die and the entire world's going to end and nothing fucking matters, right? Why wouldn't I hang out with this dumb stoner kid in a parking lot? Like, that stuff is good. And then anytime it's like, what if the president cared about how many followers she has? I'm like, I don't give a shit. I really, like, you have nothing to say here. But yes, this movie, I mean, and you talk about the ending being the funniest part of it. It's also like, infamously, this movie was supposed to end with this extended pie fight, which would have been like the broadest sequence in the movie. And Kubrick watched it and he was like, this is too silly. It's too goofy. So you end like 5 minutes before it was intended to end, and you end on like a comedy edit. Like, the ending is funnier because the movie then ends so abruptly.
I completely agree. It's like it ends on a jump cut to an explosion. That's
Right.
amazing. That's genius.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like a MacGruber edit. That's what it is. I just realized that's what it
MacGruber.
is.
Yes, that's
It's
no,
the
and you know what?
MacGruber
And Kubrick was actually ripping off MacGruber, and people
loved
should point that out more
MacGruber.
often.
That's, you can read there the letters that Kubrick wrote to Will Forte and Jorma Taccone, where he said, "I've studied your new
Brilliant.
3-part sketch."
They weren't letters; they were faxes. He
They
loved
were
to send a
faxes.
fax.
Right. How did you do it? How did you find this mix?
I think it was actually teletype, as I recall. It was not
Yeah.
fax, it was
Yeah,
teletype.
you're right. He had a teletype machine in Spielberg's office or whatever.
David?
Yep.
The sponsor of today's episode is Mubi.
Yes, that's true.
Now, that's old hat.
We're always talking movie.
We've been there before.
Nice streaming service.
We love them.
wonderfully
We talk
curated
about
and
their
all that.
streaming service. We talk about their podcast. But today is something a little different.
Yeah, because Mubi make movies too.
Mubi distribute movies.
Mubi distribute movies.
Yes.
Yes,
Theatrically,
Mubi
yes.
is presenting a new film called Decision to Leave
Uh-huh.
in theaters on October 2nd. Well, actually, no, wait. This episode's coming out on October 2nd. It's in theaters on October 14th.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah.
Dates are important.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
It's the new Park Chan-wook movie. You might know him, the acclaimed director of Old Boy, The Handmaiden.
A movie I love. I talked about a lot in that year's Blanky Awards. You have seen this film.
I sure have.
Oh, boy, the excitement.
It's wonderful. I mean, that's not surprising. You should make the decision to stay
In the theater.
in the theater when
Right.
they start playing it.
You should make the decision to leave your home.
Yes.
Go see it.
So the premise, a mountain climber falls to his death.
Okay.
Did he jump or was he pushed?
Good question.
So you got Detective Jun. He arrives on the scene, starts to suspect that the dead man's wife was involved, and it all goes from there. It's Park Hale is the detective.
Okay.
He's in lots of Korean films that I feel like people would
Mhm.
recognize. And Tong Wei plays the wife. We love
Black hat,
Tong
less
Wei.
costume?
Exactly. I was
Talked
going to
about her a
say
couple
a
times now.
multiple
Yes.
blank check whatever actress.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No.
don't know. Love
I'm,
her.
I'm very excited to see this movie. What you just told me about is more than I've known up until this point, because I love to go into Park Chan-wook movies knowing as little as possible.
Yes, I mean, right. It is a or whatever detective movie, kind of,
This is the thing.
but it's a
These
Park
movies are
Chan-wook
never
movie.
quite what they're
There's a couple
presenting themselves to be.
couple twists and turns. It won Best Director, I think, at the this year's Cannes Film
Mm-hmm.
Festival. It's South Korea's Academy Award submission for international feature film, and it starts on October 14th in New York and LA, and then expands to theaters nationwide. And it's brought to you by Mubi.
Thank goodness.
for movie.
For everything they do. Yes.
MUBI.com movie. So go there, I guess, to read about Decision to Leave, and go to see Decision to Leave whenever you can.
Yeah, just sign up for movie. Everything movie does is good.
This is my first Kubrick. I assume it may have been yours as well, or am I wrong? Maybe 2001, I guess, would be a lot of people's first Kubrick. But I was like 10 when I saw this movie.
They were pretty close together. It was either this or 2001. I watched this because AFI in the year 2000 did their 100 Years, 100 Laughs, which I was obsessed with as a comedy-obsessed kid. I'm like, finally, here we go, the comedies. And then it was one of those things where I sat there flummoxed, turning to my parents going like, this is supposed to be the funniest movies of all time. What is this serious black and white nuclear warfare movie doing?
Right. Why is there all this discussion of missile codes and switching to channels or whatever?
Right. And I remember Blockbuster had the 100 Years, 100 Laughs display where they put all of those VHSs in the same little section. So this was like a quick rent for me after that special, because it was, I think they put it at number 3 of all time.
Number three, above Annie Hall and behind Tootsie.
Right.
I feel like they redo a lot of this.
Tootsie
Some Like
at
It Hot is
2.
the number 1.
Yes, I
Tootsie
remember
at 2 is
just
strong.
feeling wild.
I don't know. Do you disagree with that, Sean? We all like Tootsie.
I watched Tootsie after that, and Tootsie made a lot more sense to me as a kid than this movie did. But even still, I was like, this isn't the second funniest movie ever made. That's absurd.
Well, this movie and Tootsie have a lot in common, right? Because they are extremely funny movies at stages, but they feel important. And Tootsie, I think, particularly to Hollywood, feels very important. It's like, this is about acting and transformation and identity and soul of art. And so it was really valorized by the business. And then that's what the list that you're talking about. And I was just like you guys, I worship those lists. I learned a lot by just looking at them and saying what's on my checklist? What do I have to go through? It's definitely the reason why I got into Strangelove in the 90s when they did the first AFI 100 Years, 100 movies. And I think he had the most movies out of any filmmaker on that list from, I think, 98. I think it was probably Clockwork Orange, Strangelove, and what was the third one?
2001.
2001,
and Spartacus. He had 4. He had
4.
Spartacus
Jesus.
on there too. So 4. Yeah.
Sean, I threw this trivia out at David recently. Can you guess who is the actor who is currently the most represented on the main AFI 100 list?
Ooh.
It's an interesting one.
I mean, gut, you would say John Wayne or Katharine Hepburn or someone like that. I don't know. Who is it?
Robert Duvall.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have 2 Godfathers, Apocalypse Now, To Kill a Mockingbird, Network, and I think there's one other one I'm forgetting.
MASH.
And MASH 6.
Wow. But not a single lead performance.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. That's true.
Even though he led dozens of movies.
Yeah. Yeah, but none of his leads.
Duvall and Network, my single favorite, funniest monologue ever, when he's toe-to-toe with Holden after Holden fails, and we had a big fat big-titted hit. That whole thing is that is the pinnacle of overacting, in my opinion. He's amazing. That's
another movie that similarly, like this, gets sort of an impossible tone right. And in that, it's no traditionally comedic actors. You have guys who mostly come from drama. And it's such a fine tonal line on that film. And we talked about in a different episode, in a Shining episode, I think we talked about coming later, that Kubrick was one of only 3 people who even met to direct that movie.
And he and Chayefsky, they never clicked. Why you'd think that they would have been a match.
Right. Chayefsky essentially said, look, you're great and you would do a good job, but we would kill each other. We can't do this. It's true. I mean, and it makes sense. And he picks Sidney Lumet, and that makes sense too. It's just,
I don't understand that. If Blank Check and The Big Picture can get together, I don't really see what the problem is.
I know.
That's right. Anything is possible because we're such fierce competitors.
Alphas. Yeah.
Four alphas in the same Zoom window right now. I mean, producer Ben alphing us the most by not even speaking. He's fucking letting us all hang ourselves with our words.
Ben, when did you see Strangelove for the first time?
My uncle showed me when I was a kid, and I was similarly like Griffin, very underwhelmed.
Crazy. I thought this was so funny when I saw it as a kid. I think I like it. Remember it as like a thunderbolt moment when he says, "You can't fight in here. This is the war room." As a kid, I was just like, "Oh, that's like brilliant. Oh, I understand. Like, okay, like." And for I guess maybe the Sellers thing was enough for me to lock into the humor of it, or maybe I was just compelled by the story because it is like a compelling story. They are trying to avert World War III. Like there are stakes, but I was like so into this movie when I saw it as a kid.
As a kid, I think I didn't find anything funny in the movie until Strangelove himself shows up, where I'm just like, well, this is recognizably comedic. Everything else was too subtle for me, where I even think like there's no fighting in the war room. Like a lot of those lines are delivered so straight that as a kid, I just was like, this is not pitched like a comedy. I don't get this.
Yeah, like George C. Scott didn't read at all as like a comedic performance. But then watching it
so funny.
Like earlier today, he's like incredible.
He's amazing.
Like one of, I think, my favorite performances in the whole movie.
He's kind of the Duvall of this movie, where he's towing a really fine line of like overacting, but with like a foot in reality and just making very small choices that sort of throw everything off the hump.
I was reading that he was kind of unhappy with this movie, right? Because Kubrick used his more over the top line readings, and that like he identified the comedy, but George C. Scott is like one of the more serious theater and film actors of the last 50 years. So it's amazing.
Well, for one, we should acknowledge that George C. Scott was the friendliest, nicest person who ever worked in Hollywood, and everyone got along with him.
Of course. Easy.
Have you
Easy
seen
peasy.
that? Oh my God. Wait, have you seen, it's so good. What's the Jiminy Glick interviewing Nathan Lane and asking about George C. Scott drinking on stage, and Nathan Lane like just is in hysterics, unable to answer him. It's so I'll find it and send it to you guys. But
I've been watching so much Glick recently.
Jiminy Glick is the fucking funniest.
The funniest shit in the
best.
world.
I think he's like taken over TikTok or something. I don't know why I'm getting more of him recently, but he's sort of everywhere right now.
No, I've been watching Glick Supercuts. How is that not streaming in its entirety anywhere?
It's crazy. And it also could and should come back right now and just be a series. It would work perfectly.
It'd still be good. It'd be better, probably.
Right. There should be Glick every year. Like there was some year where he did the red carpet at the Spirit Awards or something. They gave him like a little cabana and he was interviewing like Ed Begley Jr. and shit. And I'm just like, send him somewhere to do something on camera at least once a year as Glick.
He should do the Barbara Walters special every year before the Oscars.
Yes.
Like that should be his lane now.
Right. He should just do that. Yes.
I just remember him asking Ed Begley Jr., how does it feel to know that you'll never surpass your father? And he's like, well, I'm still alive. I'm still working. He's like, Ed, it's not going to happen.
The George C. Scott thing is, I mean, he's an ornery guy, as people may know. But he would do these quote unquote sort of practice tapes that would not like that. Kubrick was supposedly assuring him like, we won't use these. But let's kick off with these over-the-top performances.
Get it out of your system.
Get it out of your system, exactly. And then he, quote-unquote, used these warm-ups in the final cut, and George C. Scott says he didn't like that. But then there's also this whole thing where they would play chess all the time, because I guess George C. Scott fancied himself a chess man, and he respected that Stanley Kubrick, like, annihilated him at chess. He was like, anyone who's good at chess is okay by George C. Scott. What are you drinking there? Can I have one of those? I added that.
Hammered Chess with George C. Scott is also a show I would watch. Yeah.
100%.
That's like Hot Ones from the 1960s. Yeah.
I love that. That might be a great YouTube idea. Just playing chess with celebrities who are like, what does the knight do again? And I'm just like killing them.
Also, like, more directors should take lessons from Hot Ones and realize, like, oh, maybe all actors would be most interesting 10 wings up, 10 wings down. When you get them to a state of just raw honesty. No, I was going to say, it's funny because I feel like I've read so many different anecdotes about quote-unquote serious or dramatic directors who work with, like, comedic actors, trying to cast them against type, and that their process will often be to do the Kubrick thing. And be like, after 100 takes, Jim Carrey is so exhausted that then you get the one real take out of him. Like Peter Weir, Michel Gondry talk about that, where it's just like, you have to push him to go as big as possible because he's going to go as big as he can. and get like 10 takes that wear him out so much that the 11th take is the first usable one because it's when he's just tired. And then Kubrick actually reverses his own system on this movie and is like, to get one good take out of a notoriously self-serious actor, I need to tell him it's a rehearsal and it doesn't count. And then disregard everything he does after that.
It's funny too, because George C. Scott was not George C. Scott at this time.
No.
Right? Like he had made The
No.
Hustler, but like he
He'd done
really
The Hustler.
hadn't done a lot of stuff. And like his early stuff is much more, and this is true in Anatomy of a Murder too. He's much more like serpentine and kind of sinister and not big, not yelling.
He's got that fucking beak of a nose that makes him look so predatory. I mean, I love George C. Scott, and certainly an early actor for me where I was like, I like whatever this guy's doing. But you're right. Like, I think it's later when he's doing the really like to the rafters kind of acting that I guess is the apex of that is Patton, right? Like that's when it's like this guy has found a public figure that can fit, you know, how big an actor he is. And Patton's good. I like Patton. Like,
humongous hit, wins Best Picture, and is the second time George C. Scott publicly refuses to be nominated. There are a lot of guys who goes,
don't even talk to me about Oscars.
Right. He really upped the game, and no one's been able to surpass it because you have your people who are like, look, I think competition amongst creatives is stupid. I refuse to attend the ceremony. If I win, I won't accept it. George C. Scott was like, no, I'm telling you, you didn't nominate me. And they're like, we did. You're on the list. And he's like, absolutely not. I decline your offer. If you look at his IMDb awards page and it says,
yes, refuse to
1960,
even be nominated.
Refuse to even be nominated. And for Patton, it says, refuse to accept the nomination and the award because he did not feel himself to be in any competition with other actors.
My single favorite thing about that, though, is that the following year, after refusing the Academy Award, he was nominated again.
Yeah, they were like, yo, you like that? All right.
They were like, I'm still voting for this guy. That's
Frank
amazing.
McCarthy, the film's producer, accepted the award on Scott's behalf at the ceremony, but returned it to the Academy the next day in keeping with Scott's wishes.
Grand opening, grand closing, you know, just get it out of here.
Yeah, take this piece of shit.
What a legend.
He put it in a big slingshot and he shot it straight into the Kodak Theater.
That's what they're not mentioning. They returned it through a fucking office window.
It's just funny because when you hear that and you know about George C. Scott, he almost becomes like a Daniel Day-Lewis figure in my head. Not that Daniel Day-Lewis didn't happily accept his Oscars, but where you're like, did that guy just like never work? And he was really specific about the kind of stuff. And it's like, no, not at all. He did like great horror movies. He did a lot of TV later in life. Like
his final film was Angus.
That's true. His final film was Angus. No, Griff. He was in the Gloria remake after that.
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus, right.
But, you know, like he was not like a pretentious actor, I guess, is my point, right? You know, he's a real working guy. I think
he was, well, I mean, no disrespect, but he was obviously he was a bad drunk. He was a really bad drunk. And,
horrible drunk.
And like many actors of his generation, like needed to make money at the end of his career, and so did a lot of genre stuff. Very famously did Exorcist 3 in like one of the crazier performances of the 80s.
I think he rules in that. Yeah.
It's great, but it's like it's so different even from just like The Changeling, right? He's in The Changeling, which is this really like solemn, serious horror film. He's amazing. Incredible.
And that movie's really scary. But that's a very literary, serious horror film, right?
And like, so yes, he jumps from both of those like within 6 years. It's kind of amazing.
We talked about this, I think, in a Patreon episode for some reason, but he also voiced Smoke in Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue.
He sure did. I can't remember why.
Because I think Ben was saying there should be a villain who's just drugs.
Right.
And he essentially plays that. Like he's like a sentient cloud of smoke who's like, hey, smoke this crack. But it's George C. Scott playing like full intensity.
Wow, you just brought me back to Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, which is something I've probably not thought about since 1989.
A George C. Scott picture.
My brain is melting.
Yeah. It's just wild that he did it. Like, he was one of those guys who, I think, would do things for a paycheck, but was like, but I'm going to act. Like, he wouldn't fucking arrive on set cynically, you know? It was just funny that he was like, it's a job. I just do my job. You pay me to do my job. And it's also funny that, like, Campbell Scott, his son, I feel like is one of the most gentle actors alive. Like Campbell Scott never raises his volume above this level. He's like permanently in NPR mode.
Have you not seen Jurassic World Dominion? This is the first time he goes off the rails.
His most unhinged performance, and even still, he's like, I'm going to play this like Tim Cook doing a keynote. How dare you do this to me? Why did you unleash my dinosaurs?
That movie is so stupid. And no offense to Campbell Scott, who I think is a great actor, and I think he's incredible in so many movies. But I think I said this to you, Griffin. Him being in Jurassic World Dominion felt like they called 3 bigger names.
Yes.
And they were all like, forget it. And Campbell Scott was like, sure, I'll do it. Who cares?
But
I'm
he's
in an office,
also
whatever.
the best performance in that movie, the best part of that movie. And it almost feels like he's giving a Strangelove-esque performance.
He's doing something in that movie.
Yeah.
One other thing before I want to give you guys, I'm going to crack open the dossier, but Griff, a question for you. So George C. Scott is my winner in 1964 on my beloved spreadsheet.
You put him as lead or supporting?
Supporting actor.
Okay.
Peter Sellers is my winner for best lead actor, in fact.
Wow. Okay.
Do you think George C. Scott would refuse my award?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it.
David's spreadsheet is a sham. Why is he retroactively nominating things 70 years later?
He was not alive in 1964, and I refuse the nomination and the win. I don't care if my name is in bold.
He would ask to be deleted. So Control F,
Yes.
C. Scott, delete all mentions.
If he hated award shows, imagine how he would feel about podcasts. Jesus Christ.
Jeez.
Oh, he would absolutely despise us. He would be grinding his teeth listening to this on Pocket Casts right now. George C. Scott. Okay, but yeah, moving on from George C. Scott to why Stanley Kubrick makes this movie. So this is post Lolita. Well, I don't know. I was almost going to say, like, is this his first, like, true masterpiece? But I might go to bat for Paths of Glory. I don't know.
Yeah.
What you guys think.
Yeah, but this is sort of the first canonical masterpiece, maybe within its time recognized as such, right?
Yeah, because Spartacus is a huge hit, but not recognized as a masterpiece.
I think it's such an interesting question with him. You guys have already talked about, I assume, a few of the movies.
Yeah.
So I've spent more time like digging in. But, you know, there's a pretty strong contingent of people that would call The Killing like one of the best heist and noir movies ever.
Killing fucking rules.
It rules. I can't argue with that.
And at the time, it wasn't hailed as such, but and there's a lot of retroactive love for it. And like, I think Tarantino was like really, really advocating for that movie in the 90s. And so a lot more people got onto it that are more our age. But I think in the sort of like in the AFI sense of the masterpiece word, like this is definitely the first one where it was like, okay, our genius is upon us. Like our 1960s auteur hero in America has arrived.
Right. And even just the framing of like The Killing is a B picture. You know, Paths of Glory doesn't hit in its moment. Spartacus is humongous, but is seen as a Douglas victory more than a Kubrick victory because he was sort of for hire.
Right.
This is the first one where it's like Stanley Kubrick auteur. It comes out, critics love it. It's liked by audiences. It's a hit. It gets Oscar nominations. This is the first one maybe where he's defining the specialness of a Stanley Kubrick film upon landing.
It's also the beginning of like everything he does is from now on is now going to be in a new genre, is going to be a landmark film in that genre, is going to feel like this just titan effort, this like gargantuan thing of like Full Metal Jacket is the only one that maybe isn't quite there, but like the rest of them obviously are. Anyway, Stanley Kubrick becomes obsessed in the late 50s with nuclear holocaust. Makes sense, both in terms of his personality and the Cold War, the times people are living in.
I was thinking watching this movie for how much I panic about everything, especially the realities of the world that I cannot control. And it's not like it's no longer a concern. I cannot imagine the base level of anxiety I would have during like the atomic panic.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of just knowing that this could happen. Well, not that, of course it could still. Yes, I agree.
It sucks. But I'm like, if I had been like a kid in school being taught like duck and cover, I would have been like, I'm out. I don't want to be alive. This sucks.
But there's a case to be made that it felt that way because it was narrativized to the public that way.
Absolutely.
Like that is something that, as you just said, David, like is still true. Like we are on the absolute brink of nuclear annihilation right now. as we are recording. And wouldn't it be a great episode if it just all went belly up at this exact
Yeah,
moment?
it'd be pretty good.
Yeah, thank God no one
that
ever
would
have
be
to
an-
listen. As long as it's after the Patreon billing in the month, I'd be fine with it. It is the thing that is so scary about like nuclear weapons is that you just have to push the button one time and it happens like immediately, you know?
But this movie forces you to think about it the same way that the government was forcing you to think about it when you went to school every day. And we just don't live in that society right now.
No, we just now have agreed to not really talk about it that much.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's not worry about it. And that's what Kubrick is sort of fascinated by, is as he's like digging into all this stuff on nuclear war and all this, is like, this is the quote I like. It's like, what has struck me is their cautious sterility of ideas. Like, where he's just like, you're reading this absolutely bananas stuff, but it's written almost academically with the sort of like, yeah, and then of course, the world would be blanketed in, ash, and like, if this one little thing went wrong, or if this strategy didn't make sense, like it's very funny to think about it this way. He's not even getting to that yet, but like just the ruthlessness of what he's reading, and then the clinical way it's being presented is very Kubrickian. I'm sure he agreed. And so he scoops up this book called Red Alert, which is, of course, what Dr. Strangelove is based on, by Peter George, that is a serious nuclear thriller.
Mhm.
It's not a comedy at all, right? It's heavy. I assume no one's ever read Red Alert.
No.
I have not.
No. I mean, he liked it just because he says it just sort of like, had the right kind of knowledge in it. But he brings in Peter George, and as they're breaking the script and they're joking around, Stanley Kubrick is like, would this be better as a comedy? Like, and that's where things start. I guess they're just like, what if one of their jokes is like, what if everyone's hungry and like a sandwich delivery man shows up to the war room, like things like that, like they start to do jokes, and they can't get away from the silly jokes of all this stuff.
So what if Dr. Strangelove, but with Postmates? Like, is that what that joke is?
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, do you guys think that's funny? A deli guy? I mean, that's draft one. I mean,
Okay.
they obviously they kept it out.
It's hard
For
to
some
believe he
reason,
had to call Terry Southern to get involved.
Well, here's the thing. 100%. They bring in Terry Southern to transform the screenplay into something satirical, because they are actually not funny people. The other thing that's important is that Stanley Kubrick had been offered the novel Failsafe, another nuclear novel.
Right. This is often sort of misrepresented, right?
Right. Basically, there was some kind of lawsuit filed during the production of Dr. Strangelove that meant that Failsafe had to come out after Dr. Strangelove.
Yes.
And Columbia put out both movies, so they didn't care. But it does kind of kill Failsafe, which I've never seen. You're a Sidney Lumet completist, Griff. Have you seen Failsafe?
No, I weirdly haven't seen Failsafe, and there was sort of famously the early 2000s or late 90s George Clooney Failsafe.
Yes, which I've seen that. That's pretty
I've
good.
seen
but
that
that's it.
too, but I've never seen the original. Yeah.
That was done sort of like Playhouse 90 style, like live to tape. Right.
It was
Right.
live.
Yes.
That's why it was
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen the original Failsafe. It's fucking amazing. It might
Really?
be Sidney Lumet's best movie. Like, I highly recommend it.
Wow.
It is so taut and interesting and very different from a lot of his other movies. And it's really, really fascinating to imagine a world in which these two guys like flipped these movies. If Lumet takes on Strangelove, yeah.
It's Mathau?
Yep. Mathau.
Yeah, it's Mathau.
Fonda is the president, right?
Yes.
Henry
Henry
Fonda.
Fonda's president.
Can I amend a thing quickly from our Spartacus episode?
Okay. I don't remember anything about our Spartacus episode.
I talked about Tony Curtis after he had gone to Hollywood and was successful driving back outside his old acting class and yelling at Walter Matthau that he couldn't get pussy. That's, I believe, the quote that I attributed to Tony Curtis. I looked up the original quote the other day. The thing, he drove back outside his old acting class. Walter Matthau was standing outside in the rain holding a newspaper above his head. And the thing that Tony Curtis yelled out was, "I fucked Yvonne DiCarlo." Which I just think the specific of that is so funny. I had to amend it.
Fair enough. Thank you for making that clear.
Can I request a Patreon only episode about Mathau's sex life?
Yes. Tony Curtis made it sound unexciting.
I mean, Curtis really worked the bag on Mathau's sex life. But, Walter Matthau had a bunch of kids. He had a couple wives. I'm sure he had a little fun in there. Anyway, they bring in Terry Southern, and he, I guess, is the one who gets Sellers involved in some way, right? No,
Sure.
I'm sorry. No, other way around. Sorry. Sellers is the one who gets Southern involved because Sellers had given Kubrick a copy of The Magic Christian, Terry Southern. And so that's how it all happens. JJ's read on the screenplay, though, is that it's Kubrick wrote it, George inspired it, and Terry Southern finalized it and made it funny.
Gotcha. Okay.
The first page of the screenplay says the story will be played for realistic comedy, which means the essentially truthful moods and attitudes will be portrayed accurately with an occasional bizarre or super realistic crescendo. The acting will never be so-called comedy acting. So basically, the script tries to make it very clear, play this about as straight as you want, right? The seriousness will help the comedy, which I think is true. I don't know. I mean, with the occasional flourish from Peter Sellers, essentially.
Sure, or some of the bigger George C. Scott moments. I did finally have the breakthrough watching this of how much of an influence this movie must have been on the Zucker brothers and John Abrahams.
Totally.
It feels like this is the style they glom onto of can we even go bigger from here? What if we have the actors play it flatter and the things they're saying or doing become even more ridiculous?
Well, but also they don't allow for what Strangelove does, where Strangelove will have whole sequences of technical discussions or relatively realistic military code things. Whereas in the Zuckers are yeah, okay, but there has to be a joke every 20 seconds. No matter what is happening.
And at the very least, something funny has to be happening in the background or written on a sign or something. But it does feel like this is a launching point for them.
I think also Kubrick is a little bit more comfortable, even as absurdist as this movie is at times, doing things that if you don't think about them seem banal or as set up, but are actually a joke. I mean, the whole opening title sequence is just one big dick joke. It's just about how bombs fuck the world, and the idea of refueling a plane in midair. I'm sure the first 2 or 3 times I watched that movie, I never even thought about that. I was like, oh, this is just a way to get us into the story, No,
you're just zoning out. Right. Aircraft footage. Right. 100%.
And then the more you read about it, the more you think about it, the more you're like, oh, every single sequence here is a sight gag or is a part of the point. And, the Zuckers and Abrams are like what David said. They're just you will be entertained at all times. We will never take our foot off the gas.
Kubrick eventually said to someone, right? Yeah, the whole point of Strangelove is that there's so many sex jokes in it. It ends in this big orgasmic finish. I was going for something with that. I think I'll find that somewhere. Anyway, they bring in Sellers. As we all said, it's a stipulation of the studio that he play 4 roles for the price of $1 million. Apparently, Kubrick kind of groused about that at the time, but also there's this really funny Sellers quote where Sellers would be Stanley would be sitting outside my front door saying, "What about Buck Schmuck? You've got to play Buck Schmuck." And so that Stanley Kubrick is just leafing through the screenplay being what about this guy? You could do this.
Well, the movie also costs $2 million.
It's all Sellers. Yes.
It was all Sellers. And in retrospect, I think they were kind of a bargain.
Yeah. He gives you 3 incredible performances. I really love Stuart Freeborn, who does the makeup for this movie, says that for Muffley, he gave him this giant bald cap to give him this bulbous head. And he does look incredible as because it doesn't look exaggerated, but he really does look like a different guy as a result.
Yeah,
it's quite drastic without being, he just looks like a, middle-aged guy with no hair. It's not, I don't know. I really love Muff. I love all 3 Sellers performances. And the thing where he sprains his ankle and he can't do Kong, everyone seems to think that's kind of just an excuse. He just wasn't into it. He didn't like doing the voice, and they just moved on and they got Slim Pickens.
I mean, he always said he didn't want to do it, that he didn't feel comfortable doing the voice. They didn't think he had a grasp on the Texan accent. And I think that role works a lot better with Slim Pickens. Hire the real type you want this role to fit into and have him play it straight rather than having Sellers do a satirical take on it. If you're going to have him, I mean, we were talking about before, like which characters of this movie couldn't he play? That's arguably one of the characters that most needs to be played by someone who isn't straining to affect something else upon their natural disposition, you know?
I think especially in the final sequence where, you know, the Yahoo and all that, like it would have felt too broadly comic.
Yes.
Yes, it would have just felt like hat on a hat. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But you even like you could very easily see a version of this movie, I think, where Sellers plays Buck and Strangelove instead of Strangelove and the president, you know, especially because in those early scenes before Strangelove enters, Buck is the driving motor.
Do you know who the original plan was to cast for Jack D. Ripper, the Sterling Hayden role?
No.
I don't.
Gene Kelly.
Jesus?
Isn't that crazy? Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
If Gene Kelly played Jack D. Ripper, if it was like Gene Kelly wound up to psychosis, like firing guns and talking about fluids. I don't know. I just love that idea. That's who Kubrick wanted. He wanted Gene Kelly. When he doesn't get Gene Kelly, he casts George C. Scott. And George C. Scott then was like, I want to play Buck Turgison instead. And Kubrick was like, okay. And then he brings in Sterling Hayden from The Killing. It all works out. I mean,
it does.
Everything's good. Yeah.
Sterling Hayden's great in this. It is fascinating because Gene Kelly was notoriously kind of an asshole, an unpleasant guy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But his screen persona was so tightly controlled. And did he ever play against type? Was he ever anything but sort of gentle and genial on screen? Like, as much as there are off-camera stories where you're like, oh, I can imagine that he could be a guy who was like yelling his head off Taskmaster. I just wonder if he ever would have let himself be captured on camera doing that.
There's two funny things about it, right? Because on the one hand, he was pretty good at playing a shit heel who changed throughout movies, right?
Yes.
He was often like redeemed. His characters were always
this
redeemed.
incorrigible guy. Yeah.
But he had this like genteel virility. You know, it was like he was very sexual and physical, but it was very safe and appropriate. And like Ripper is the exact inverse.
Yeah.
You know, he's like this emasculated, psychotic man who is so full of rage because I guess his dick doesn't work. Like whatever, however you want to read it.
Yeah, that's where I'm reading it. That's how I'm reading it. Yeah.
And so that would have been it would have been fun to see Gene Kelly do that. I think Sterling Hayden is the right person for it, but it would have been fun.
That's spot on, Sean. Like the thing about Gene Kelly was that he was so comfortable as a performer and he made audiences comfortable and he could take characters that were a little unsavory and make them sort of family friendly without you really interrogating what's going on underneath the surface, which is why a character like this who is like all text, no subtext and shouted loudly, it's like just hard to imagine him letting go enough to do this, as much as the idea of him doing it is interesting.
Jack D. Ripper also is very obviously based on Curtis LeMay, who was the head of the Air Force at the time, who is basically famous for, like, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, whenever you read any book about Kennedy, it's basically Curtis LeMay is in there being like, listen, you pansy, we need to nuke now. Like, he's the one who's just constantly like, my recommendation, bombs. And he later ran for vice president with George Wallace, I want to say.
Cool. A couple of cool guys.
Famously chill dude. But then they throw in that disclaimer at the beginning of the movie, I guess, to cover their asses and not freak people out too much. That disclaimer that almost reads funny because it's so straightforward, where they're like, the Air Force has assured us nothing like this could ever happen. And you're like, oh, cool. Like, thanks. Like, that really settles me down.
It almost feels like a Monty Python thing.
Right. It's just
it feels like
bureaucratic language. Yes.
The movie gets interrupted to have Eric Idle say, like, we are, of course, obligated by lawyers to.
Right. And then while they're shooting it, Sellers is improvising some of his dialogue, which Kubrick would then write down and put into the original shooting script. James Earl Jones, as you guys know, is in this film. It's his first film appearance, I believe.
Yeah.
And he had a big role. He's the one who questions the mission and is like pushing back against everything inside the plane. And eventually Kubrick decided he didn't want the guy protesting to be a black guy and cuts everything out.
Wow.
And so that's why James Earl Jones is kind of in this movie, but doesn't really do anything.
He's just like an X-Wing pilot. I mean, they just cut to him a lot in the cockpit saying, yes, sir, or whatever.
And James Earl Jones said to Kubrick, like, but I took this part because of all the good stuff that you're cutting. And Kubrick was like, we don't need it. And that was that. So that's the James Earl Jones story.
I mean, because he's already pretty fucking established as a stage actor
theater guy
at this point.
Right. Yeah.
And you just imagine people viewed his move to films as somewhat inevitable.
I guess as much as a black actor could feel that way in the 1960s. Yeah, I don't know.
He was not like a character actor. He was like Hamlet. Like
that's
he was
the
in
thing.
He was in Shakespeare.
He had done
heavy duty
Othello.
And,
and like he'd done all kinds of giant Shakespeare stuff. And I guess The Great White Hope is a few years after this, and gets turned into a movie that's his Oscar nomination and all that. But yeah, anyway, I just remember as a kid, I knew who James Earl Jones was, and I was like,
of course,
he's in this movie. But
it also just like it feels weird to see this voice coming out of him. Like, I'm sure if you were a theater goer in the 50s or 60s and you saw James Earl Jones on stage, you'd be like, man, this guy can project. And then when there's like throwaway lines by James Earl Jones in a cockpit in this movie looking like a young snack, you're like, who turned up the fucking bass on this thing? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no reason for him to be like pontificating.
Right. He's got a great voice, famously.
Incredible.
I would say the other big thing is Ken Adam doing the production design. He had just done Dr. No, and Stanley Kubrick had loved Dr. No. Obviously, Ken Adam is best known as the James Bond designer. But the design in this movie is so crucial to it working, right? And it feels so Kubrickian, obviously, to have these like big angular sets, and the war room just feels perfect for him. But like a lot of that is driven by Ken Adam, who justified that it should be triangular to Kubrick, who was very skeptical of that. And he and Kubrick together designed the whole lighting scheme so they could stop the cinematographer from designing any of the lighting, because Stanley Kubrick always would fight with his DPs about lighting.
This movie is like the last vestige of the Kubrick documentary style in pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of that is just that his hand is forced by Sellers, who like notoriously just hated repeating himself and doing the same take over and over again. So Kubrick was like, I just had to set up 6 cameras and just get what I got. You can't be as meticulous. And this movie shifts between like very deliberate Kubrick compositions, which Lolita was obviously moving towards, and away from that sort of more fly on the wall approach. And then from this point out, it's like everything is fucking locked down and precise.
I feel like there's still some dissonance for me as somebody who has just read a lot about him and a lot about the productions of his films. And you get conflicting reports pretty consistently. And this movie feels like an interesting turning point where, you talk about the production designer, who's this legendary figure who's well known for basically having like shaped the look of the most powerful ongoing franchise in movie history.
Right.
Yes.
And he obviously designed this movie. And that in the production of this movie, there's a lot of like commentary or counter commentary about how Kubrick was a real like collaborator. That he was a person who would like sit in a room, and every morning for an hour, people would talk and share ideas, and he would just pluck the best ideas and he would curate. Mm-hmm. But I feel like publicly, his reputation is like monomaniacal, obsessive, singular tyrant, right? And so like I can never kind of figure out, well, is he a great like if you see Film Worker, that movie about his right hand person for many years, like is so laudatory and like really warm about what it was like to work with him. But on the other hand, he has that like 100-take psychology that makes him seem like a demon. And I can never kind of figure out like what is true, or maybe both things are true about him.
Do you have thoughts on this, David? Because I certainly do.
Let me say my thoughts, because I mean, obviously it comes up more and more, especially as we're going deeper into his filmography, and he becomes more powerful, right? Like he has more clout. And it really does remind me of Fincher. And when I did this piece interviewing all of Fincher's collaborators, which I may have said in a different episode, it's like the same thing of like the absolute warmth all of them have towards him. and like how dismissive they were of like, oh, the multiple takes. Like people like doing that. People were just, they were just like, come on, it's acting, it's work. We all come here to work and we're having a great time. And that's the vibe you get from so many of these. It's not like Kubrick collaborated with people one time and then they moved on. Like people would return to him and clearly found the process of, Ken Adam, for example, he wins an Oscar with Kubrick for Barry Lyndon a few years later. Like, so it's obvious that if you bought in or if you got onto his wavelength or whatever, that there was such a rich like collaboration you could have with the guy. And then it just feels like the stuff like the Shelley Duvall stories, you're like, well, this is someone who clearly was like, they were not in any kind of symphony or what, like they were just, there's just some kind of crossed wire, and like the communication seems so horrible here. And then that just sounds like torture when it's being described here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird. I mean, I've made this comparison already in other episodes, but like he's compared so much to Hitchcock and the precision of the vision and everything like that. But Hitchcock was a guy who like the movie exists in my head, it's perfect, and now I need to figure out how to communicate to you idiots how to do exactly what I want. Right?
Yes.
Right. Sure. Yes.
Whereas Kubrick, I think, was really looking for things that excited him. Like he wanted discovery, he wanted exploration. He wanted the things that he couldn't come up with himself. But I think it was like his sort of exacting control freak nature came in the relentless pursuit of, I'm not going to stop until I find that thing. And when he finds the thing, it's like, it's exactly that it's that without moving an inch to the right or to the left. And I think sometimes he would hire people and say, like, I'm hiring a collaborator like Peter Sellers. And what I'm hiring him to do is be Peter Sellers and give me a lot of material to keep generating until I find the thing I want. And then sometimes, be it on camera or sort of, in craft positions or whatever, he'd hire people to say, I like that thing you did in this other movie and I want you to replicate it here. I already completed the process of finding what I want because I saw it in your previous work. Now just do it again. And I think that's when like he had difficult relationships with people, because then they were like, I'm not being encouraged to create. He just wants to use me as a color on a palette. Whereas other times I think he was saying, I haven't found it yet. I'm hiring someone to give me options,
Yeah, I think I have a kind of a reverse relationship though to Kubrick and Hitchcock, because I think I like Hitchcock at his most powerful. I like him in the North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds, Rear Window. That era are my favorite films of his, when he's like, I'm in Hollywood and I'm in control of everything. And right. Kubrick, it does eventually get to this place, right, where he's like, and you guys, I'm sure we'll talk about this at length in the future, but by the time you get to Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, I love those movies, but you can feel a man holding a stick very tightly in those movies in a way that this movie is like, the 100th time you watch it, it feels surprising. The 100th time you watch it, you're like, boy, a lot of really fascinating, like risk-taking people seem to be in a room together making this happen. And that's just, for whatever reason, for him, it's just a slightly more charming for me, slightly more exciting.
It's also so interesting because, like, Spartacus, the story is like, I got hired by an actor. I'm on this set with all these fucking August, well-established, ego-driven actors, and I'm fighting to, like, get what I want, to have this in any way reflect my voice. And he comes off of that being like, I'm making movies my fucking way. I'm not working for anyone else ever again. But then this is a movie in which he views an actor as a true collaborator. Mm-hmm. And then you get to stuff like, Eyes Wide Shut, where he's working with Tom Cruise at like the peak of his fame. And he's like, you are an instrument. There are all the stories of Tom Cruise coming to him, like crying, going like, what do you want, Stanley? Tell me what you want. And Tom Cruise is so obsessed with being the guy who's like, I can execute anything.
Right.
And Kubrick's like, you're a cat. Just wander around until I find what I want, You can't deliver it to me.
Also, his last three movies, Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut, I think the reason The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut are more successful in that they are two of my favorite movies than Full Metal Jacket, which I think is a very good, slightly flawed movie, is that like The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut are about the most tightly wound protagonists imaginable. So they really fit with a very tightly wound, ultra controlling artist who is crafting these like very hermetic and frightening and claustrophobic movies. Whereas Full Metal Jacket, I'm like, I feel like I'm in a room and I'm supposed to be in Vietnam. Like, you know, I struggle a little bit with Full Metal Jacket for that reason.
You're so right. And also,
yeah.
all three of those movies are really psychological. And Strangelove is intellectual, but I'm not so sure it's psychological.
No, I mean, no. The only stuff where it feels more like Kubrick-y is the stuff I'm referencing, where it's like, oh wow, did I just watch guys put codes into a box for 5 minutes? Like, you know, that's just where you're like, I think a lot of directors wouldn't do that, and I like that he does. To be clear, I like that he's so obsessed with the process, because part of the satire of Dr. Strangelove is there's all these fucking processes and rules and, you know, fail safes and things built in. And then everyone gets in a room and they're like, oh shit, there's so much stuff that we actually can't tell these guys to turn around. Like there's so many stupid codes and so many like, you know, systems built up to stop that from happening that one crazy guy just ended the world. Oh. And then like, that's why it's equally as funny when the Russian ambassador shows up and it's like, we built this doomsday thing. I don't know. You guys are so crazy. We figured we had to do something crazy too. And they have to explain all these like logic of that, like the absolutely ridiculous logic of these things.
Not to like, but it was the thing that was like so unnerving from the moment Trump got elected was like, here's this guy who spent the last 10 years going online and going on talk shows and going like, if I were president, I would just do this instead, with no thoughts about like, what is the chain of actions that happens from you saying that? And then he got elected and gained no perspective on the chain of action from what he says. And it is like, it's the absurdity of when you cut to a fucking room like this and it's a bunch of guys in suits sitting in chairs being like, first pitch, bad pitch, but what if? And you're like, the repercussions of what you're casually throwing out are so wild. To think of how much they hinge on like a conversation is kind of insane.
Yeah, I feel like he's also gotten a little bit stuck in a good way on process and technology being portrayed on screen. And like 2001, like there's huge stretches of 2001, they're just like pressing buttons on HAL and trying to figure out like what is the right way to do something. The same, I think, is even true of Clockwork Orange, where there's like long stretches of deprogramming where you're just like thinking through what you have to do to the human brain to fix it. And he kind of like gets way far away from that stuff as he gets further into his career. But you can see like the same way that I feel like technology just sat right on top of society from like 1960 all the way through our present day. He seems really invested in that. And so that's part of the reason why I think he's like, we're going to sit in this plane for watching this movie for like the 60th time. I'm like, God, this is a lot of time on this plane for a 90-minute movie.
The plane. Yeah. For when it barely matters, except I guess at the end you're like, oh, I guess we needed to know that the plane was damaged, et cetera. You know, we need to understand why at the very end this plane just can't be caught. Like these guys are actually too good. Which I'd love that. I love it. Where when Muffley is like, it's initiative. Like, what am I supposed to? You know, he's on the phone to the Soviet guy. He's like, we trained them to get away from them.
Dude, when he goes into the safe and pulls out the hat, like that is part of the plan.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, God, that's like Looney Tunes level joke, but it's so good.
But I mean, it also gets to like what you were talking about, Sean, of like the dick measuring contest of this shit, you know? That it's like the idea of being like the cowboy of the atomic bomb, you know, the man wild enough to ride the thing, and that it wasn't an impulsive decision, but that like this guy was going to go out like a fucking cowboy when the moment called him.
Yeah, Kong almost like channels Ripper once he accepts that Plan R is real. Like once he's accepted it, he's like, you're goddamn right we're doing this. How exciting. You know, which is what a weird impulse to be like, it is doomsday. It's here and I'm fired up. But
yeah, and I'm going to do it like a fucking man.
I love Keenan Wynn, who plays the colonel who Bat Guano, is that his name? Who shows up and, you know, There's just the super extended sequence of Mandrake just being like, for God's sake, man, give me some money. I need to call this guy on the phone, the president. And he just like the so slow. Ben's laughing. I mean,
well, he's like, you're gonna have to deal with
Coca-Cola. It's a great final line. But like, just every time you see the layers and layers of rules that have been created out of some sort of like, of course, we need these kinds of rules to have a just society that will not bomb, at random. And then you just watch how all those rules just make everything impossible. It's really good.
David?
Yes.
We thought we had one ad sponsor for this episode.
That's right.
We were recording our ads, and Ben says, actually, late breaking.
He said a second one just came in.
It just came in.
And I said, oh, what's the company? And he said, I'm not too familiar with this.
I'll drop it for you. So he sends us a link to a Google Doc, which is usually how we get our ad copy.
And this ad copy does say that we should feel free to ad-lib the introduction with a personalized story, which we're doing.
Now we are. And then what I'm going to do is just read verbatim the copy as it is presented to us.
Please do.
Okay?
Yep.
But we get a Google Doc drop to us that says BS Inc.
BS Inc. And I said, we don't have any BS on this podcast ever.
Absolutely
but
not.
Okay, but
straight talkers.
Read those first 3 bullets, please.
Okay. Items highlighted in yellow are mandatory must read.
Sure,
I want
that's
people to
true.
understand the formality of how this is being presented to us.
He's made this look like anyway. It doesn't matter.
Please feel free to ad-lib the introduction with a personalized story. Check.
Yes,
done.
We did that.
Here are the 3 bullet points.
Hit those bullets.
Good. It's not easy.
That's
No-
bullet 1, to be clear.
That's bullet 1. Bullet 2 with 2 exclamation points. Good! Exclamation point. It's not easy! Exclamation point. Bullet point 2. Nope. You got to work. WERK. But that doesn't mean you can't also.
That don't mean.
I'm sorry. Nope. You got to work. But that don't mean you can't also look damn good.
Damn
all
in
caps.
caps.
Damn.
Yep.
And third bullet point.
Actually, I would now say this. Give this one some zoos.
Congratulations. The clothing and lifestyle brand by Benjamin Hosley has dropped its first collection.
Wow. Okay. All right. So next, I'm going to read from the copy here. Please try to mention all the talking points below, but you don't actually have to, really.
We're reading all of them.
Yes. All right. I'll hit one.
Yeah.
The centerpiece is the buried jeans. Two pairs were modified using primitive distressing techniques, i.e., burying them in New Jersey soil. Interred in 2019, they were harvested in 2020, exactly 1 year later. Exact 365. Ben is blushing.
Yeah, he's the
is
reddest
red.
I've ever seen him. Yeah.
yeah, exactly 365.
Amazing.
Okay.
These one-of-a-kind couture pieces include a mannequin leg form for displaying in your home and only cost $1,000. There are also dang-ass freak shirts for all the DAFs out there. I've got one of those.
I go into it's a good shirt.
It's a good shirt. It says here that a major design influence was a puddle Ben saw one time. Why don't you hit the next one because you love hats?
You can pre-order your congrats hat, which features a 5-color embroidered bunch of balloons. I love this hat. I actually wore it so much.
It's a good
need
hat.
A new one.
Yeah, I might need to get myself one. It's a good hat. Whenever I wear congratulations stuff, I get asked,
I
like,
do
what's
too.
that?
I got the same question when I wore the dang ass freak shirt.
Yeah, that one's really a statement
It's a
piece.
statement piece,
Yes.
yes. Or perhaps tell the world you are very good, all caps, and wear your good ribbon.
Yes, it's a ribbon that says good.
And yes, it's an award ribbon that says good in the same font as the daddy hat font. Available in neon green, orange, pink, or yellow. Plus, there's a slow Xmas ornament.
Which is good. I have one.
I do too. We've
got it all.
Complete
He's
collection.
offloaded it all on
Right.
us.
And plenty more good ass stuff. This is real. People have been asking for years
If this
when
is
the
happening.
congratulation drops would happen, when they'd be available to the public. There have been limited quantities on sale when we've done live shows, but this is the first time people anywhere can order this stuff online.
All right. Well, I'm going to now do the call to action because
Please.
I always do.
You must read this.
Yes.
It's highlighted
It's
in yellow.
highlighted in yellow.
It's a very formal. Ben really went through and copied.
And he phonetically, here, let me hit it.
Yeah.
So go to congratulations.com to see for yourself. Yes, congratulate yourself for being you and go to congratulations.com right now. Congratulations.com. No vanity URL for us?
There's no promo code
no,
for our
special
listeners.
promo code for our listeners.
All right. Full price.
Yeah, Ben just wants to make as much money as he can.
But we should clarify that
Yeah.
is congrat, YOU, lation.
Oh, you're actually, that is, okay. Oh,
Okay.
right. Of course.
We couldn't tell if you were just
wait a
spelling it
second. Of
phonetically.
course he didn't get the word congratulations.com. That would be insane. So it's congrat you. Is there a hyphen?
No.
Okay. So congratulations, one word.
Congrat yourself. And
Sure.
go to congratulations.
CongratYoulations.com.
Great.
Great.
Right
Thanks,
now it's
guys.
asking me for a password, but I'm assuming you'll make it live.
Yeah.
You can cut that out.
Keep it in and double it. CongratYoulations.com. Should we attempt to go through the plot of this movie? Because it is more plotty
It's plotty.
than maybe its reputation would suggest.
No, it is, but it's just also surprisingly simple, or at least doesn't have a lot of sets. You know what I mean? It's sort of
Sure.
like you've got the plane, you've got the, the 843rd bomb wing or whatever.
Yeah.
You have Jack D. Ripper on bass with Lionel Mandrake, and you have the war room, and that's it, right? Like
Mhm.
there's the one scene of George C. Scott with his girlfriend, the only woman in the movie, I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
Yes,
believe so.
I don't know, there's
Yeah.
no other, Tracy Reed, and that's everything, right? I'm not forgetting something. It's one of these deceptively sort of cheap economic films, like even though it looks so broad and the sets are so impressive.
Right. It's basically 3 sets. I guess 4 if you include George C. Scott's bedroom.
Apartment,
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Apartment. Yeah.
So actually, while we're recording this, I was preparing an episode of my show, and the theme of the show is like the best One Crazy Night movies. And I was like, is this one of the best One Crazy Night movies? Like,
Oh,
this is
interesting.
kind of the ultimate One Crazy Night.
It's a fair point. It is absolutely one crazy. It's practically an afternoon. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a short period of time.
Yeah, but Sean, what about the wolf pack? I mean, that night was so crazy I couldn't even remember it the next morning.
That's a wild one. That is a wild one.
So these
What-
guys
wait,
so
wait.
fucking wild.
Sean, what was the peg for One Crazy Night? Is there a One Crazy Night movie coming out or something? I know August is.
Bodies.
Of
Oh.
course. Right. Bodies. There you go. Yes. I know. I just imagine August is the toughest for the big picture because it's like looking at the schedule, what could we possibly,
One could make the case that every episode is tough to do at this stage of Hollywood, but that's okay.
That is true.
I admire the opportunities that you guys have to talk about the great films.
We designed this well by accident.
You're right.
It was certainly a thing, like especially when the pandemic hit, where I was like, God, am I happy that 5 years ago we committed to a format that does not revolve around any current going on.
Well, that's the thing. But then anytime we actually do have to review a new movie, we're like, this is
I know.
so annoying. We have to do it within a week.
I know.
Ah!
It's maddening. It's like the bane of our existence now. But I mean, in the early days, we would be looking for excuses to cover new movies where we'd be like, oh, we both like Jack Reacher. Let's do an episode because Jack Reacher 2 is coming out. We're
Yeah.
deciding that is worthy of being in the pantheon of what we cover. And then now we're almost like trying to find ways to disqualify new releases by technicality.
Yeah, it's like I think there are downsides to the format that you guys have, but for me, it's like, can I wring 37 minutes out of Bullet Train? Like, really, do
Sure.
I have 37 minutes of conversation about
Can
a
you?
movie that is vanished into dust the minute I exited the theater?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. But hey, we're all professionals. We can all do it.
Right. Look, certainly, I mean, we'll cover movies that are like that, but also have the added benefit of being decades old and not seen by anybody.
Those are my favorite episodes, though.
Right. And then exactly, we can have fun being like, well, what's this over here? Whereas it's
Right. What
That's
do
it.
you have for lunch? People were like, what all-time best tangents? Griffin asking David what he had for lunch in the Loveless episode.
I had a burrito, but let me tell you guys, I ordered it. I got home this morning. There's no food in the house. I ordered delivery from like a place around the corner. Thank you. And they sent me the wrong order. They
Oh,
sent me a different David S's order.
Oh,
There's
my
two
God.
David
Oh.
S's ordering at the same time.
David S. Ward?
And I just
David S.
called them, and
Pumpkins.
they and they just ran me my order, and I gave them the other guy's order back. It all worked out.
Wow.
That could have been an inspired bit in the sandwich delivery scene in Dr. Strangelove that Kubrick had conceived. Like, what if they got the wrong Mr. President sandwich?
That's what he was missing. That is actually what he was missing.
The joke was right there, Stanley.
David, in you running down the basic shape of the plot, which I do think we should delve into a little more. I do think that's a thing, watching this as like a 10-year-old or whatever, that confused me is I was actually a kid who liked this type of movie where there's like a fundamental misunderstanding or miscommunication in the chain, the ripple effects of which put the entire world on edge, right? Like we talked about in some recent episode how much I loved The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming as a kid, which is a movie that is like kind of similar in its setup where, and it is also like a comedy about the Cold War, you know?
Cold War comedy, similar era, 66. Yeah.
Right. Or, I mean, one of those movies that I remember thinking was so funny as a kid, and yet I don't think I could tell you a single thing that happens past the 15-minute mark. The Gods Must Be Crazy. A movie I assume plays terribly today. But one of those things where my parents could pitch me like, here's the premise of the movie. They find a Coke bottle and it destroys their entire understanding of reality. And I'm like, funny. I understand like comedic cause and effect. This movie, I think if you're watching it as a kid, it's hard to even gauge when the realization of what's going on with Ripper has happened, because it's done in such a sedate, dry way.
It's very ordinary until it's not.
Right. Then he gets crazy, but like that happens so much later than the point where Mandrake figures it out.
And it's when Mandrake has the radio, right? Like that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's the revelation. And again, and Sellers underplays it just so well. He's like, funny business. I was listening to the radio here, doing all. I wish I could do him. Yeah, I don't know about the plot, Griff. Like, it's like, you see the planes, they're airborne. And then you see, you see Ripper issuing Wing Attack Plan R, and you see them doing all the communications and all that. And then eventually Mandrake realizes there's no attack order. Nothing is happening. Ripper has just gone mad. Ripper locks them in the office, starts talking about fluids, and then we cut to the war room pretty much, right? Or we cut to Buck with his girlfriend, and then we cut to the war room.
Hinging on this sort of overthought idea that once that plan is put into effect, all communications have to be ceased because they're too worried about their enemies interfering with false communications. That now a false communication has set them in a place where no one can correct them with the real message.
Yes, the only guy who can undo it is insane.
Yeah, I mean, he's also, there's a lot of unfortunate kind of like sexual metaphor to read into the entire movie. But like he's trying to put a prophylactic around the whole base, right? Yeah. And everybody else, especially George C. Scott, is like, I'm ready to fuck. Like the movie literally starts with like him in the bathroom getting ready to fuck. And then he's like, well, I can't fuck here, but I have to go downstairs and fuck in the war room. Like that's
sure.
Every setup is about a man trying to have sex with something.
Well, and it gets back to like the weird cowboy sort of fascination with the bomb of like it's all these like it's sport for these guys, it is like a sexual thing. The idea of being able to dominate on this scale, to control that much power,
conquering,
even if it fucking kills them, right? They feel like I'm gonna die like John Wayne, right?
It's what Scott plays so well is you do buy him as the general of the Joint Chiefs presenting options to the president, but then just like the hint of excitement he clearly has at like, look, what if we actually do it?
Right.
Maybe we could catch them with their pants down. The famous, 10, 20 million, we'll get our hair mussed. But like that he's like, look, I've spent my whole career planning for something like this. We might as well, the ball went down the hill. I'm not going to go get it. Like,
right,
let's see what happens. Maybe we knock him out.
His biggest concern at this point is almost just being blue balled. Like he's so close to the thing that he's waited his whole fucking life for, prepared for.
It's how it ends too, and he's like, we need to be prepared when they take over more underground caves so that when we emerge,
so
our numbers
are
stronger.
Right.
The mind shaft gap, yes.
Yes. No, and like, Muffley is a very funny performance. Like, it is a good comic performance from Peter Sellers as a slightly ineffectual wet blanket of a president. He modeled it on Adlai Stevenson. Like, he's doing a thing, but you're also kind of watching this guy be like plainly heroic. And he's like, fuck it. I'm going to call the Soviet premier. I'm just going to give him the like location of these planes. I'm going to like plainly be unmilitary, right? I'm going to just be like, just shoot those guys down. We're sorry. Total mistake by us. He's not going to like be an evil war hawk. You're watching a guy, you know, do the decent thing in a weird sort of a way. It doesn't really work, but like, it's cool. It's cool.
It's such an interesting point too, because to Griffin's point about Don't Look Up and the Meryl Streep character, it feels like the last time in American history where a satire like this, the most reasonable person in the film was the president. And
That's a great call.
It's because Kennedy was the president, and he seemed like a, if not reasonable, at least a measured person in the face of possible nuclear annihilation. And so that choice to make everyone around the president crazy is so smart and works so well in this movie.
But that's a thing that Nixon breaks, where it's like, now we know a president can exist in the modern age, in the media, who can behave unpresidentially at their very core. Not just do corrupt things, but like clearly lose it, you know? Like not be able to hold their shit together on camera. And then from that point, the possibilities comedically get a little out of control. Can I throw out 1960? Is the year that Bob Newhart releases The Button Down Mind and Button Down Mind Strike Back, right? Which are like the best-selling albums of that year and win the Grammy for Album of the Year.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like a heavy influence on the way the president's phone call with Russia play out in this movie. Like they are essentially doing the the Bob Newhart bit. Like Peter Sellers is doing Newhart, where the joke is in filling in the blanks of what they must be saying on the other end of the phone. Only getting the reactions in a conversation where it feels like the other person is saying the larger things.
And isn't that the album that has Abe Lincoln versus Madison Avenue?
Yes.
And it's like the presidential inspiration connected there too.
I do think like that's the most clear-cut example, because he's really kind of pulling Bob Newhart's format. Which, by the way, what's his name? Shelley Berman kind of created before Newhart. Newhart maybe lifted a little bit, but Newhart at least popularized to a different degree. But even just comedically, I think the whole tone of this movie is very much on that wavelength of the Abe Lincoln versus Madison Avenue, where it's like, can you really dig into the banality of these conversations around things that we view as being very important and dramatic?
Right.
I mean, there was some quote from James Earl Jones where he was saying that like Kubrick's main thing was he constantly wanted them to be eating, that he kept on giving them like Twinkies to shove in their mouths and shit. And he was like, I think he was just really into putting these very banal, mundane things in the middle of a very high pressure situation, which gets to the meal order and everything.
Right. This is the quote. I think that was a comment on how people deal with fear. I think he liked the mundane aspect of horrific events. And it makes sense. Like, again, that feels like a Kubrick observation that would not be that would not be obvious to other people.
Yeah.
I think all that little detail stuff is so funny. Like, obviously the big lines in this movie hit it. When it gets broad, it works. They were probably right to cut the pie fight or whatever. Like, they probably recognized the moments where it was like too much. Like, Strangelove is probably the limit of how broad a thing can get. But Strangelove works too. But I just love all the little stuff you're talking about, like the conversation with the Russian premier or whatever. Like, all the little haggling that George C. Scott does. Like, that stuff is just as funny as anything else.
The line where he's like, he would see the big board.
That line is so
when
funny.
He's protesting the ambassador showing up. Like, God, I have to say too, and he's come up in a later episode already, but I just was really getting Tim Robinson vibes at times.
Oh my
from
God.
George C.
We
Scott.
have to stop invoking Tim Robinson on our
Okay, I'm sorry. It's just I couldn't help it.
You don't understand,
couldn't
Sean.
help
There's
it.
like 20 minutes of talk about this on the Shining episodes.
More. No, but it is that thing of like the complete commitment to absurdity, you know, just like full throttled. I strongly believe what I'm saying. I'm getting too emotionally worked up about it.
I think the only other person who could do all four of these roles is
Tim
Robinson.
Agreed.
Yeah, imagine the remake.
We're starting to realize that perhaps Tim Robinson is the only person who could have starred in every Kubrick movie aside from who he actually cast.
Born Too Late. The only, so the attack is happening. They're trying to figure out how to recall it. They bring in the Soviet ambassador. They try to call up the premier on the phone, and he reveals, well, we have this doomsday machine that if anything goes off in our country, it's just going to blanket the world in nuclear fallout. And so everything will be destroyed. And that's when Dr. Strangelove comes in. I feel like he's the last element to arrive. And I remember as a kid, like you say, Griff, I was like, I get that this is funny. Obviously, this is a big, broad performance, but what is going on? Like, Who is this? Why would he be here? And I remember my parents having to be like, well, after the war, there were all these German scientists, like having to explain the context of that bit to me. It makes me laugh so much now. And it's almost a more understated performance than I remembered.
Yeah.
Is that crazy to say?
No,
he's actually kind of, he's kind of quiet with the lines a lot. You just remember him shrieking, and he doesn't really shriek that much. Like I don't know. Like it's almost subtle at times.
It's the one character that plays most in close-up.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like this is a movie that's really big on wide shots and holding your master shots for like the entirety of a scene as long as you can. And his stuff is played really close. Like when he starts talking, he is kind of the only thing that exists on screen. And so if he were over the top, it would play even bigger at that range. And you're right that he is actually pretty controlled.
Yeah,
he saves the mania. I mean, he really takes a while to build up to it and picks his moments very strategically.
I can't remember. I don't know. I'm going to get the title of this wrong, so forgive me. But, there's a story that Orson Welles used to tell about starring in a play called something like Waiting for Mr. Wong.
Mm-hmm.
And he was playing Mr. Wong, and everybody had to wait through the first 2 acts of the play for Mr. Wong to show up. And that, like, you really needed to deliver on Mr. Wong because everybody who showed up for that thing. Doctor Strangelove's kind of the same thing. I mean, you have to wait almost 55 minutes just to get to Sellers as Strangelove. Why is this movie called Doctor Strangelove? And even at the end of the movie, I'm not even totally sure why it's called Doctor Strangelove. It's just the best title, but it's not the most representative title. And there are like so many titles that they messed with that I'm sure you've seen, David. Like Kubrick wrote down like 30 different titles. Half of them are kind of genius and would have been great for the movie, and yet somehow Strangelove and that character, like, it became the most emblematic thing.
But you're right that it's kind of a miracle that the character actually does deliver.
He does.
And that it feels like a heightening when we've already had like 2 Sellers on screen, because they only create that expectation by calling the movie that. Like the movie is not foreshadowing him.
Right.
If his name were not in the poster, that pressure would not be on the character. You could see a reality in which the film had one of the other titles, which I'm sure David's about to run down. And then when Dr. Strangelove shows up, you're like, oh, pleasant surprise. In the last act, there's this Peter Sellers character you'll never see coming. Versus me as a kid, I'm leaning in going like, when are we getting a fucking Strangelove? That's where the money is, right?
Like Wonderful Bomb is a funny one that he came up with that is kind of amusing. Dr. Doomsday or How to Start World War III is one that feels like it probably came close. Sorry, How to Start World War III without even trying.
Okay.
The weird one is Dr. Strangelove's Secret Uses of Uranus. I don't know what got cut from the screenplay that would make more sense. What else? I'm looking at it. He has there's this like note page.
Yeah, that piece of paper
that he like, don't knock the bomb. Dr. Doomsday meets Ingrid Strangelove. He's just like writing shit down. I don't some of this stuff doesn't make sense. Don't look up.
Vice.
Yeah, the big short. What was it called? Is that what it's called? How do I not remember?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I got it. Yeah, some of the names they don't use. General Buck Schmuck, Alexei Desideski. So it was going to be called Ambassador Assad. That's kind of funny. Major Nance, Lieutenant Quentin Quiffler.
I like the idea of Peter Sellers saying, not only am I refusing to play Buck Schmuck, but there should not be a fucking character named Buck Schmuck in this movie. Take that out of the goddamn script.
One of the funniest scenes to me, and tell me if this is too dark, is when Sterling Hayden kills himself because of the monologue that Mandrake is doing that's so banal, where he's like, yes, some water on your neck, that's what you need, that'll wake any man up. Like the whole, it's so funny. And then he shoots himself. It gets me every time.
Yeah, it's fine.
I don't know what you guys think of that. It's funny, sure.
I'm just trying to look at these other names. I just feel like the bomb in Doctor Strangelove, or How to Be Afraid 24 Hours a Day, is just an amazing.
That's good.
How to Be Afraid 24 Hours a Day.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's really good, but it's interesting that Doctor Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb is the only or title that works. Like, even the other titles that are good, you're like, you could have picked the back half or the front half.
Yeah.
When you put the or in there, it's too much.
I think it has to be called Doctor Strangelove, and they were right to pick that, even though it doesn't really set you up for what the movie's going to be. Just because it's just a great name. It just sits in your head so well. You'll never forget it.
Yeah, and also just the fact that, like, when the character arrives, as you said, he delivers, so it feels earned in your head.
There's no more context about this movie. Like, this is like the most chill Stanley Kubrick shoot. He doesn't fight with the studio that much.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's basically on board with what he's doing. Sure, George C. Scott's a bit much, but he respects him. Like, this is just the one that is not loaded with either big fights with his producers or crazy tales of 100 takes driving people mad or anything like that. Like, and like you say, Griff, like, it's a hit, moderate hit, and more importantly, gets Oscar nominations, and whatever becomes just whatever, the most respected comedy of all time in some circles. That's why when Sean picked it, I was like, wow, you picked kind of the most unimpeachable one in a way. Like, it's an interesting pick. Sean, you had your pick of Kubrick's.
I'm very grateful for that.
Of course.
Well, I don't think I said when I first saw it, and I actually don't know when I first saw it, but it is definitely not the first Kubrick that I saw.
So what was?
I definitely saw The Shining before this, and I definitely saw Full Metal Jacket because it was on HBO nonstop in circa 1990. So I may have even seen 2001 before this as well. So then
2001's the only one I'm not sure. I may have seen that first. It was one of these two.
I saw
Go ahead.
these two.
But just to see this movie and like not know anything about Killer's Kiss or The Killing or Lolita or Spartacus or any of I never saw any of those movies before I saw this, but I had seen all of his sort of like later period masterpieces. And this is the biggest what's it to me. This is the biggest like, how come you never tried anything like this again? Because you're so good at this.
Yeah.
And it's the one that is the most singular to me. It's the one that I probably watched the most. Obviously the funniest, but it's also, there are 900 million like NewYorker.com essays about this, but it's the one that's like, this movie still applies. Nothing has expired about it at all. And even though we don't live in an age of nuclear panic, it's like, this is exactly how government works. This is exactly how power operates. This is exactly how like masculinity motivates people to do awful, stupid things. And so it's this unusual document. A lot of his movies, I'm sure you guys are talking about, like really continue to resonate strongly. But this one in particular, I'm like, it nails the absurdity of modern life in 1963. Like, that's wild.
But there is the interesting aspect of, I mean, you asking why wouldn't he do this again when he nailed it with this, is like, it felt like he was sort of competitive with himself in terms of, if I've succeeded doing something, then the next challenge is to take on a different type of movie I have not made before and see if I can make it better than everyone else, right? I'm going to make the scariest movie of all time. I'm going to make the most sort of like intellectually respected comedy of all time. I'm going to step up to the table, pick a genre, pick a milieu, whatever it is, a technical challenge. And like, once I knock that out of the park, I have no interest in repeating myself.
I think part of the other reason that it's interesting to me is the last thing that you said, David, which is that it's not a film that is mired in like production controversy, which I do think creates a lot of interesting conversation. But he's one of the few people who I'm like, I don't really care about that. Like I do care about it with David Fincher for whatever reason, but with Kubrick, the movies themselves are these big ideological tentpole concept driven films that I think are worth just like tearing apart and looking at closely.
Especially also starting with this, if Kubrick fights with people, he wins. He always triumphs. It's not like some of these other auteurs where it's a give and take, or but like one for them, one for me. Like, yes, Kubrick loses some battles on like Spartacus and Lolita, but after Doctor Strangelove, like, as much of a pain in the ass as he could be, he ends up making a revered movie that is discussed forever. Like that is so it gets a little boring to talk about it. I agree.
It's an interesting point you raise because I feel the same way, but I almost think I have become less interested in that side of Kubrick over time because of how much other people are obsessive about it and focus on that more than the movies themselves. Like, you know what, I will read any fucking interview with like Fincher or Soderbergh or any of that classic guy, James Gray, these guys who are like so good at explaining their process, their interests, their tastes, their beliefs on the industry at large. There's nothing elusive about them. They're charming and funny and intelligent, and they're open books about like, this is exactly what I was going through. This is how I work. I want to demystify the thing. And something about how elusive Kubrick made himself makes it so easy for people to project all this fucking shit onto it. And I think also they want to believe that he was just this absolute galaxy brain genius who saw everything more clearly than everyone else and did everything perfectly. And it's like, that's so much less interesting to me. You know, I mean, like Terrence Malick is another person who is like spent decades being reclusive by design, doesn't speak to the press, doesn't explain his own work. There are questions about his process and all of that. But as much as I find his process more interesting to consider because it's so organic and shapeless until it comes together, there's that lack of intentionality. I'm also not like, I need to read diaries of the day-by-day accounts of how he's working.
It is fun, though, to hear Adrian Brody talk about making the Thin Red Line in a way that, like, maybe it's not as interesting to hear people talk about the production on the Kubrick films.
Right.
Because you're like, when it's like you're gambling when you're getting cast in a Terrence Malick movie,
Yeah.
you know?
100%. 100%. Yeah. No, Malick is so much more fun.
Right, you're like Kubrick. What was it like working on a Kubrick movie? He was very demanding and exacting, and he made the exact movie he wanted to make.
It was a lot of takes. He had it in his head. Right. Yeah.
Malick's interesting because Malick shoots like a fucking choose your own adventure book, and people are just like, well, they didn't choose that adventure. It's not in the book.
Well, and also Malick just, it's like he's this like fey creature from like an elvish land. They're just sort of like, oh, you know, this sort of jolly, mysterious guy in a straw hat. And, I had just done the best acting of my life and he was shooting, a dandelion instead or whatever. Right. And then he like assembled the movie and he was like, you're not in it except for one shot. You should come to the premiere. And I went and I saw it and I wept at a masterpiece. It's like, it just sounds like a delightful experience.
But they all call him Terry in every
They
interview.
all call him Terry.
He's Terry. And none of us idiots will ever call him Terry.
No.
But every actor who has been cut out of his films is like, well, Terry is a dear friend.
David, by the way, he'll never call them and say, you've been cut out, but by the way, come to the premiere. An assistant or producer will say, you should come to the premiere, and they show up in their fucking finest wares, waiting to see themselves up on the big screen.
I think I remember a Clooney interview where Malick told him, like, you're not really in the movie, but I'm using your one speech for Thin Red Line. And Clooney said, I begged him to cut it out. Like, I was like, please don't just have me in one scene. It would look so weird. And Malick was like, no, what are you talking about? And Clooney said, like, I love the movie, like, whatever. But certainly upon hearing it was just like, please don't do that. Please don't have him be sticking out in one weird scene.
The first time I ever watched Thin Red Line, it was with my buddy Doug Rosenberg, who was at college, and we rented it from like the school library and went to a private viewing room or whatever. And when Clooney came on screen, I think he literally like fell off the chair onto his knees and was like, he's introducing George Clooney 2.5 hours in. Like this so disrupts the ecosystem of you can't just casually throw in a quick Clooney monologue.
George Clooney, like at his absolute hottest, season 4 of ER, Three Kings, like really, it's so. I love that movie. I need to rewatch it.
Yeah, a fucking masterpiece. We gotta do Malick.
Yeah, we should do Malick.
Yeah.
Should we do Malick, Sean? Who should we do?
Yeah, I want in on Song to Song. I just feel like that is like really sort of disgust mastery going on in Song to Song, capturing the hotbed of Austin circa 2011. I
think those three hated movies are really interesting.
I do too.
I really love Knight of Cups the most.
That's the one.
Three weird ones.
Yeah.
But Song to Song is the one that I like. I just remember seeing it like the Dolby screening room and being like, I don't know. I have to write a review. Oh shit. Like, and I would like to return to it. That's the one that I had the most trouble with, but I do like all those movies. I like all his movies.
It's fascinating that A Hidden Life is like, I mean, part of it, I guess, is timing or whatever, but was like the most quiet comeback movie of all time.
Fucking rules.
Like, he had this mysterious legacy, then made 3 bombs that made everyone go like, is this guy a false king? And then he had this like return to form movie that already I feel like has kind of been forgotten.
He foretells the like on stage personal crisis of Ben Affleck arguably better in To the Wonder than in Gone Girl. Like he is like ahead of the curve on what's happening to Ben Affleck. You know, like Malick, he knows more than he lets on.
And I feel like I should rewatch To the Wonder for that reason, where it's like I saw it when it came out and I was like, oh, this is sort of interesting that Affleck's in it. And now, as part of the Affleck taxonomy, it would feel crucial.
It's an interesting text.
God, I somehow had completely forgotten that he has made a Jesus Christ movie with Gessa Rohrig as Jesus Christ and Mark Rylance as Satan. That's something 5 years away in the editing room from us getting to see.
Yeah, I mean, Malick rules. There's no debate about that. He absolutely rules.
He rules. But he's only 78. He's got a bunch more twirling left. It's great. We're gonna get more Malick. Should we play the box office game, guys? Can we do that?
Yeah. Are there any final thoughts you have, Sean?
Yeah. Is there any Strangelove stuff we haven't mentioned?
My favorite tidbit is that Stanley Kubrick cast one of his heroes' daughters in this movie and put her in a bikini in a scene. That's just absolutely absurd. Like Carol Reed's daughter is Tracy Reed. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And
that's crazy.
You know, like he really aspired to make these sort of like patrician, beautiful English. You know, he makes Barry Lyndon later on, and so there's something very perverse. The whole movie is very perverse, but that in particular is a very perverse act, in my opinion.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That's not a closing thought, but it's a little indicative of like, have we really put our finger on just how quite twisted Stanley Kubrick is? The guy who made Lolita and Eyes Wide Shut. Like he's a weird horn dog, and it needs to be reminded of that.
A weird horn dog. Oh
Yeah.
boy, would
One
I
of the
not
weirdest
want to
ever.
be in that bedroom? Like,
No.
Yeah.
and I'm a horn dog. I respect it, but I'm just like both this. You're right. Both like all the movies and Eyes Wide Shut. I'm like, I don't think I'm interested in
He's
whatever
got
this
some
is.
unique predilections for sure.
Did she have a thing with Peter Sellers? Because I'm looking and like after this, her 2 biggest credits are Shot in the Dark and Casino Royale.
She was married to Edward Fox
Mhm.
all the
Really?
way up until the production of this movie.
Okay.
And then they
Mhm.
split up. And then I think it makes it seem like maybe she made a leap to Sellers. Who, I mean, obviously he was very active at this period in swinging
He was quite
London.
active.
Yeah.
Another guy where I'm just like, I imagine having sex with Peter Sellers was the most vacant activity in the world. I mean, it's obviously the thing everyone talks about where like there was no guy there beneath the characters.
Right.
Well, but imagine if he stayed in character during the act.
Then it'd be thrilling. I'd love
mean,
to fuck
Strangelove
some
in
of
bed?
these guys. Yeah.
Oh God, no! Keep me away. No, I don't want it. I don't want bits. No bits.
Those are my closing thoughts. Stanley Kubrick is a perv.
Yeah.
Okay, so this movie, which box office game should I do? Should I do the one where it actually is on the charts, which is the end of February 1964? Why not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do that.
Okay. Yeah.
When does it technically come out? That December? or
Technically
something?
came out right at the end of January 1964.
Oh wow! So it's getting nominated for Oscars a full year later.
Yeah, man. And
Wow.
like shit, we didn't even talk about those Oscars. I don't even know what beat it. Do you guys?
Well,
let's
no,
off
let's
the top
talk
of my
about
head.
that. Let's fucking pull it up.
My Fair Lady. Pretty boring. I mean,
Not
I
great.
love My Fair Lady, but that's not a good movie. And like, you know, whatever. Yeah, George Cukor wins Best Director. Rex Harrison wins Best Actor.
Come on.
And
This is boring as
yeah,
hell.
this is pretty boring. And Julie Andrews, of course, wins Best Actress. That's a great Oscar win because
That's a
it's
great
so
win.
shady
Right.
for Mary Poppins. But then Peter Ustinov wins Supporting Actor for Topkapi, even though he won for Spartacus like 5 years earlier. You know, you could give that to George C. Scott. I don't know.
That just feels like a Christoph Waltz thing where they were just like, we just love what this guy's doing. Give us as much of this as you got.
Has an actor ever been nominated for Best Actor for playing multiple parts since this happened?
I think this is the only one.
Kind Hearts and Coronets? I'm trying to think. Like, was he not? Was
Nicolas
Guinness nominated?
Cage in adaptation.
Oh, good call. Good
Cajun
call.
adaptation is a good call. I don't think Guinness got a nomination for Kind Hearts and Coronets.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
double checking that. Obviously, that's a notorious multiple. No, he didn't.
But that's
he
pretty
did
cool.
For
Just to-
Lavender
just-
Hill Mob. Yeah.
Lavender Hill Mob. Okay, so just to see
But
like
that's not multiple roles.
all three characters being nominated for that performance, and then thinking about what Rex Harrison does in My Fair Lady. Rex Harrison, God bless him, he's very talented. But come on, Peter Sellers and Dr. Strangelove. Come on.
I agree. Army Hammer, of course, not nominated for Social Network.
I know.
Paul Dano not nominated for There Will Be Blood. I'm looking at like lists of famed multiple role.
These are all twins, though. You're all
twins.
We're talking
I
about
know.
twin characters.
I know.
Not
These
as
are
exciting.
three separate and distinct humans. Yeah.
No, I know. Yeah, Tom Hanks not nominated for Cloud Atlas. Rude.
Right. Ewan McGregor not nominated for The Island. It is an interesting,
That is a good performance.
especially the second guy. I think is a really good performance.
I agree.
It's an interesting point, and you're framing it as like, how insane is it that they snubbed Peter Sellers? I look at this where I'm like, how cool is it that they nominated him, despite him being a big movie star at the time, this being a big film and whatever. It is such a unique nomination to be like, this guy is the lead of the film because he plays three supporting characters in an ensemble.
Right.
It's true. Yeah, you're right. And it's a big look. The other nominees are Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole, both for Beckett. So two fucking titans yelling at each other in robes for 3 hours. Like that's Oscar catnip. And then Anthony Quinn for Zorba the Greek. And they all lose to Rex Harrison being like, "Where are my damn slippers?" I love Rex Harrison. But it is like, if I'm Peter O'Toole or Richard Burton, I'm like, come on, I put it all on the stage
I
for
did
you. Like
most fucking acting. Yeah.
I had a damn crown.
I had a crown.
I did have another thought about a real missed opportunity on two different roles, which is John Travolta as Sean Archer and Castor Troy in Face Off. I feel like, because he's embodying. When his face is removed, he's playing he's playing Castor Troy in John Travolta's body.
Yeah.
Like, we've never had an opportunity for that. Could Peter Sellers do that?
Yeah, I think he could.
Maybe he could. Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that's impressive about Sellers is like, he disguises himself less thoroughly than a lot of the other people we're talking about, who throw a lot more on top of themselves to differentiate the characters visually, Like, I mean, they talk about how, like, he wanted the head shape change for the president, so they didn't just put a bald cap on it, but they sort of elongated the shape of his face and whatever. But he's still, like, basically got the same face, and he puts different wigs and mustaches on top of himself for most of these movies, He's not a major, like, prosthetics guy.
No, yeah.
The other thing, too, about the Oscars is, like, it's a missed opportunity to nominate Sterling Hayden. And he's like a very complicated character in Hollywood history. I don't know if you guys talked about this on The Killing, but just his participation in HUAC, and there's this amazing documentary that was made about him, and his life was kind of falling apart in the 80s. But this is the first time when like his personal struggles like were actualized in a movie, and then I felt like filmmakers only used this in movies going forward, where they were like, this is a man falling apart who has like an ethical crisis going on. And like in The Godfather and in The Long Goodbye, and it's really, it basically like it fortifies his persona going forward in a way. And Kubrick like identified that really well, and he's really great in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the Long Goodbye performance is the one that really jumps out to me of like the idea of a sort of golden age Hollywood actor who became too messy for that controlled era, and then in New Hollywood can kind of be reclaimed as the guy who's gone through the shit, who's like on the other side and is sort of towing these lines. I mean, his performance in Long Goodbye is like spiritual. It feels like he's just operating on a different wavelength than the rest of humanity.
I love him. I do feel like we didn't mention the HUAC thing, mostly because I guess that happens after The Killing, right? Like when The Killing is what, 48?
Right, it's between
when's The Killing? No,
Killing
I'm wrong.
is,
what am I talking about? What? The Killing's 56.
No, it's before. It's before. He's like he gets reintegrated into Hollywood in some ways, which is kind of unusual. But if people haven't seen it, I can't remember the name of the film, the documentary. That it's like a Greek-produced documentary about Sterling Hayden that is one of the most like punishing things I've ever seen, about a guy at the end of his life being like, "What have I done?"
I think
Wow.
it's called Pharaohs of Chaos or something
That's
like
it.
that. Is that what
That's
you're
it.
talking
Wow,
about? Yes.
incredible
That's it, yeah.
title too. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently he's smoking hashish and drinking heavily throughout so that they have a record of alcoholism. And this sounds crazy.
He's torn
Huh.
asunder. It's wild.
I gotta
It's
watch
an
this
amazing
now.
thing.
Yeah.
And he's just saying this is the worst thing I ever did, that I
Yeah.
cooperated with Huak and all that. Yeah. Well, he's just also one of those guys with the most incredible, slab of a face. And I love to look at him.
And like fascinating at every age.
And shot below like he's Mount Rushmore in this movie too. That angle that he's shot from, where he
Yes.
looks
Yeah.
like a giant statue, is
Yeah.
harrowing.
Okay, the box office game. Yeah. So the Oscars, it's just a boring Oscar year. It's My Fair Lady. It's a lot of Beckett. It's Zorba the Greek.
hmm
Never seen Zorba the Greek.
Neither have I.
No.
I haven't either.
It's an incredible 64 is an incredible year for movies, in my opinion. You got Woman in the Dunes, which is actually nominated. You got Umbrellas of Cherbourg. You've got Hard Day's Night, for crying out loud. The Beatles. It's a great time.
Working like a dog.
But anyway, this movie comes out. All right. So number one, it's you were talking about Russians Are Coming, and what's the other one you were talking about, Griff?
Gods Must Be Crazy is much later, but yes. Yeah.
But both of those are movies where the poster has a million guys on it, right?
Yes.
Like the poster's trying to give you the sense of like, oh my God, there's so many people. This number one at the box office is a comedy with the same vibe. Like you won't believe how many people are involved.
But it's not Mad World.
It is. It's
It
a
is.
mad world.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's another one I was fascinated by as a kid, where I wonder if I watch it now, if I would find anything in it funny.
It's gone all the way around the globe for me. It was a kid that my aunt showed me probably 15 times whenever I would sleep over her house. It was her favorite movie. And as a kid, I got so sick of it and hated it. And then I rewatched it a couple of years ago and I was like, this is a masterpiece.
Really?
It's
give it a
really,
spin.
really hard to do this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do ensemble zany comedy.
It's also funny that I loved it so much as a kid, and it was my introduction to almost all of their people and their screen personas.
Right.
Like, you compare that to something like, dumb analogy, but grant me this for a moment, Endgame, where you're like, does this movie have any weight for people who haven't watched the fucking 25 things leading up to this? This movie isn't doing the work of setting up the characters themselves for this one film, perhaps. And Mad World distills everyone's comedic persona so well that I'm like, I get what Buddy Hackett's deal is. I'm not like coasting off of my love of seeing Buddy Hackett show up and cut it up with Ethel Merman. I'm meeting both of them and
Right.
immediately understanding their appeal.
It's a great call.
That's funny. Now I want to rewatch that. I don't think I've ever seen that in full. I've seen it on TV. Like I don't know that I've ever.
Very long
It's a
movie.
Mad,
One of the,
Mad, Mad
one of the
World.
longest
Very long.
comedies ever made.
Number two at the box office is the Best Picture winner of 1963. One of the most forgotten and derided Best Picture winners of the 60s, but a movie I like, partly because it stars one of my favorite actors.
Around the World in 80 Days?
No, I've never seen that shit.
It's not Greatest Show on Earth.
No, I've never seen that shit either. Those are like the two Best Picture winners. I'm not rushing to those.
Right.
Fuck that. I don't want to see him.
It's not Tom
No,
Jones, is it?
It's Tom Jones.
Well, I
It's
don't
Tom
feel like
Jones.
that's that derided. I know you love Tom Jones.
I'm always on Letterboxd seeing people file their 3 stars Best Picture ? Reviews
Bullshit.
of Tom Jones.
Yeah, no,
Come
that's
on now.
That's like a cool Best Picture winner. That's one of the ones that makes you think maybe the Academy should not be torn down.
It is crazy that in the middle of like a lot of, very staid Oscar winners, there's just one costume drama where it's like, what's it about? And it's like the horniest guy. Everybody wants to fuck him. What do you think of Tom Jones?
3 stars on Letterboxd for sure.
Best Picture? Question mark?
I think it's a little bit of a thank you for changing British cinema movie, but this is the least good of your good movies.
Wow.
Like it's
Mhm,
not as good as
Tony
A Taste of
Richardson.
Honey, Loneliness, and Long
No.
Distance Runner. Not as good as The Loved One, which comes right after it. It's
Mhm.
cool. It's a movie that's
It's
built on
cool.
one performance. Finney is
Which is
great.
a very good performance.
Yeah, he's great. But it's pretty mid, I would say.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
also just again to give you the run of Best Pictures in the 60s, it's The Apartment, West Side Story, Lawrence of Arabia, Tom Jones, My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music. Like it's like all these very totemic movies, and then Tom Jones kind of sitting in the middle there. Anyway, Tom Jones is number 2. At the box office, number 3 is Dr. Strangelove. Now, number 4 is a movie that I almost brought up. It's another political thriller with kind of a similar vibe, but it's serious. And it's a movie I really love, but it's also about like the military clashing with the president in a big Cold War plot.
Well, it's not Failsafe.
No. I'm sure you like this movie. It's written by Rod Serling, Griffin.
Oh, why am I not thinking of what this fucking is? Fuck. Because Serling didn't write that many movies.
Sean, do you know it? Do you know what I'm talking about here? Great ensemble cast.
Is it 7 Days in May?
7 Days in May. John Frankenheimer's wonderful political thriller. Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Frederick March, Ava Gardner.
So I just want to share a take that I've shared in the past before, which is that this movie comes in the middle of the most underrated 5-year run in any American filmmaker's history, which is John Frankenheimer from 1962 to 1966 makes Birdman of Alcatraz, The Manchurian Candidate, 7 Days in May, The Train, Seconds, and Grand Prix. So that's fucking good. It's very similar to what you were just describing, Griffin, where Kubrick is like, I'm going to try a different kind of a thing every single time. Slightly different genre move, slightly different style of filmmaking, and I'm going to nail it every time. And all of those movies are brilliant. Okay, that was my spiel.
I've seen all but The Train. I got to see The Train. How have I never seen a movie called The Train?
Might be the best one. Burt Lancaster plays a French resistance fighter at the end of World War II. The Nazis are trying to steal very valuable French art and get it into Berlin. And he's trying to make them not make the train go. The whole movie is how he doesn't want the train to move. It's great.
Wow, who plays the train?
Thomas the Tank Engine plays the train.
It's his
incredible
young,
performance.
He's young.
Yeah,
He's
young.
Fresh
Young.
face.
Yeah.
Fresh face.
His first film.
It's like James Earl Jones in this, where you're like, I didn't realize he was acting at that point.
7 Days in May completely fucks.
Movies used to be so much simpler, where you could just say, hey, it's Burt Lancaster in The Train. I'd be like, there, done. Sounds good.
Agreed.
It's just great star in the blank. And you're like, perfect. Can't believe no one thought to make a movie about that before.
Number 5 at the box office is an Otto Preminger movie. Big movie. Got a bunch of Oscar nominations, including, I think, Best Director, but maybe not Best Picture.
It's not Man with the Golden Arm.
No.
It's not fucking Anatomy of a Murder.
No. It's
not his performance as Mr. Freeze on the Batman TV show.
It's not that. Good call, but no, it's not that. I believe it's a religious drama, which might be a clue to its title.
Is it The Cardinal?
The Cardinal.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Not a movie I've seen.
Nope.
I would not have gotten it without religious drama. That's the only Otto Preminger religious drama I'm familiar with.
Some kind of, Irish Catholic priest, moral drama kind of thing going on. I don't know.
It's got
interesting
a good
fact
fucking
about
Saul Bass poster I'm looking at right
it's
now.
a very cool poster.
Yeah.
And Pope Benedict, the later to be Pope Benedict XVI, was the liaison officer from the Vatican for this movie.
Wow.
little bit of trivia for you.
It was also the first 35 millimeter blow up.
Oh, that's
the
cool.
first movie to be shot in 35 but projected on 70th.
Some other movies in the top 10. You got Man's Favorite Sport? ? The Rock Hudson, Howard Hawks comedy, which I've never seen. Paula Prentice. You've got Love with the Proper Stranger. That's that Natalie Wood movie.
That's
I feel
a
like we
wild
brought that up
movie.
recently.
Yeah, I brought it up.
Were you
I don't
talking
remember
about
for
it?
What reason?
Steve
Have either of you
McQueen.
seen that?
I haven't. I just would like to acknowledge that I have a big crush on Paula Prentice. I'd be remiss if I didn't say she has my heart. And always will.
Parallax View. What else is she in? Oh, she's in the Stepford
Catch
Wives.
22.
Right.
Stepford Wives.
What's New
Yes,
Pussycat?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and she was in a sitcom with Richard Benjamin called He and She.
Married to Richard Benjamin.
She's been in Richard Benjamin's life for many, many years. They are still kicking.
Since
right?
1961. They're both still alive. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Richard Benjamin, just a ridiculous person.
A 60-year plus marriage.
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah.
I mean, shout out.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Those kids might make it. What if like by the time this episode comes out, she's filed for divorce?
Oh God.
I hate that
Irreconcilable differences. what was the thing I was going to say? Love with a Proper Stranger. Neither of you have seen it, right?
I haven't seen it.
It's a fascinating movie because it's like it's about abortion at a time where you cannot believe a movie can that candidly be about it, but it's also about it in a relatively light way. And it's one of McQueen's first movies, and it's like essentially it feels like viewing an alternate path his career could have gone, where you're like, what if Steve McQueen was Paul Rudd instead?
Right.
Like he's just kind of playing like young glib guy in it, and he's very funny in it. It's a good movie. Natalie Wood's really good in it.
You've also got The Victors, which is a war film starring Albert Finney, among other people. Big, boring Carl Foreman movie. You've got The Misadventures of Merlin Jones. That's a Disney comedy, right? That's a Robert Stevenson movie. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
And I don't know. Merlin Jones invents some bullshit. All kinds of stuff happens. One of those things. And then you've got Sunday in New York, the adaptation of the play starring Jane Fonda and Rod Taylor. It's a lot of movies I haven't seen. It's an interesting box office game. You know, it's a lot of stuff that with movie stars that I don't really know that well. Jane Fonda reflected in 2018. She was surprised how many people say they love Sunday in New York. Why?
I too am surprised.
Jane Fonda, not a fan. But yeah, that's it. I don't know. And then Dr. Strangelove goes on to be a moderate hit. And then Stanley Kubrick goes on to make a little movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey. And by that point, he's like on the other side of his divorce. He's remarried and he's firmly established in London, right? Like that's sort of like the beginning of like Stanley Kubrick,
it's
the
from
fortress.
Lolita on, right?
But like this is the one where it's like it shoots in London because he's going through the divorce, you know, like because there's like reasons. And like I feel like by 2001, it's like, yeah, you come to me. Like here I am. I'm here.
It's the last time he also like makes a movie in 18 months for the last time. And then from here on out, it's like everything will take 5 years.
Right.
Yeah, right.
It's also right. He like kind of rewrites the rules of what a director career can be in a certain way. It's also just funny. Like I was watching the fucking Making the Shining or whatever it's called, the Vivian Kubrick documentary short. Every time I see a clip of Stanley Kubrick speaking, I'm once again surprised he doesn't have a British accent. And I know he's from the Bronx. I know he wasn't British, but I just half expect that he like from being there for so long affected a Madonna-esque lilt at the very least. And then every clip of him is just like, I don't know. Don't fucking do that. That's my Stanley Kubrick impression. Don't do that. That ain't no good.
So my entire family is from the Bronx and Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And let's just say that hearing Kubrick interviews is a nice warm bath for me.
Oh, sure.
Just it takes me home.
Yeah, you do think of him as English in your head. It's true. That is
and even just like
voice
when you look at
mouth.
photos of young Kubrick, I'm like, I see that guy living in the Bronx. And then when you see old sort of wizard Kubrick,
right,
with the beard, I'm like, that guy must be British. A British voice must come out.
We're done, Griff. We're done.
I just ended the podcast forever. This is our final episode. Sean, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Well, what do we have left to do? We had Sean Fennessey on. People have been asking for this for fucking 7.5 years.
You're right. Well, we have to have Sean Fennessey back now.
Oh, that's a reason to keep going.
No, I said, Griffin, we haven't discussed this, but I said to David that I would only do this if you guys came on the big picture. So I have to figure out.
Hey, that's true. We're going to do a home and home.
I don't know what you want to do, but I want to do what you want to do. So you tell me what you guys want to talk about on the pod.
That's a good question.
We'll do something. So brainstorm it. We will air them in relative vicinity to one another.
Yeah. We have a few months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you wanna theme it up, we can theme it up. You know, if you wanna just write Strangelove 2 on the fly on a pod, we can do that too.
Cool.
I leave it in your hands, both of you guys, all three of you guys. This was an honor. I feel blessed. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for doing the show.
Hey, it's so cool. Truly, it's one of those things. I mean, you've been a supporter of the show for a while, and anytime our listeners would see you tweet like a new stack of Blu-rays or see you logging on Letterboxd, one of the directors.
This brings me such joy. Yeah,
right.
It's perverse joy.
Every miniseries, they go like, which one is he fucking doing?
That's very sweet. I mean, honestly, just because I am listening to the show and watching the movies with you guys until now,
which is nice.
Until now,
which look
Until
is
now.
much appreciated. But I think it has driven people insane. I think they have had blue balls for like 3 fucking years.
we kind of screwed up. We should have just never done it. That was maybe. The
I
move.
know it was a good bit, but whatever.
would've been
and
fun.
then you'll
Yeah.
and you can keep him guessing. You'll come back at some point, and
Okay.
you know,
All right.
yeah, just keep him guessing.
Well, should we just Batgirl this episode? And
yeah. What if
Put
we-
it on the shelf?
What if we realize
leave
that
it
we
at
stand
that.
to make $70 million by never releasing this episode?
Sorry,
There's some
guys.
weird tax loophole.
We had him on the show, but it saves us millions. What
Sean,
can I
we're
tell
cutting
you? You
you
can never
in
hear
a fourth. The windfall of this episode is just going to be insane.
Sold, which means no one will ever even hear this conversation.
No,
Oh,
and
no,
it's
this is a
it's a
good one,
problem
though.
actually because we've already recorded the next episode and Michael Keaton's in it, and now that's not going to make sense because we haven't established him. Michael Keaton's going to appear like 3 more times in this miniseries, and everyone's going to go like, when did they make him a permanent third host?
Well, I feel comfortable announcing that I'm actually going to be the next Batman.
Of
I'm
course.
the post-Pattinson Batman, so you know that's I'm breaking it here for you guys.
I love
You're
the
gonna crush
idea of Michael Keaton being Batman twice, but the second time never being seen.
Right. He's just out there.
Yeah, there's just a lost 3-movie Batman arc. Sean, everyone should listen to the podcast that you do that they already listen to because they're the biggest podcast.
Listen to the big picture. Listen to rewatchables. I just finished the Unforgiven episode. I'm caught up.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me, and thank
Good
you for all the work that you guys do. Love your show.
Hey, that's
Thank you.
wow.
too nice of you to say.
Thank you.
Take us out, Griff.
Thank you all for doing all the work that you do in listening to the show. And I ask you to continue that work by rating and subscribing, the annoying things that we just have to tell you to do every week. Thank you to Marie Barty for our social media and helping to produce the show. Thank you to AJ McKeon, Alex Barron for our editing, Pat Reynolds, Joe Bowen for our artwork, Lane Montgomery, The Great American Novel for our theme song, JJ Birch for our research. Go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including our Patreon Blank Check special features, where we do commentaries on franchises, among other things. We're currently doing the Roger Moore Bonds movies that have a lot of Doctor Strangelove War Room type sets. It is funny how this movie, hiring a James Bond guy to design the War Room changes the way you're allowed to put these things on screen forever. Like now they have to look like this or they feel too boring. I don't know. That's the final point. I shouldn't be making this. I'm trying to end the podcast. What the fuck am I doing? Tune in next week for
2001: A Space Odyssey.
a pretty big movie.
Yep. Guess TBD.
Guess TBD. Yeah, we can't even say. And as always, I was looking at a list of actors who played multiple roles but didn't get an Oscar nomination. And there are a couple big ones that we forgot about that I just want to quickly shout out people who should have gotten Oscar nominations, including in past episodes. Lindsay Lohan in The Parent Trap.
Of course.
Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future Part 3.
Sure.
Yes.
Right? That's, I guess.
2 and 3. 2 and 3. Yeah.
Yeah, he should have gotten 2 Best Actor nominations back-to-back years. Wait, I had another one here. Fuck, I don't know. I give up.
Great. Good. Done.
No, wait. What's his name in Assassin's Creed? He plays 2 characters.
Yeah, great. That's the final one. That's the end of the episode. It's Michael Fassbender in Assassin's Creed.